Okay. And thank you all for coming and sharing this time with us so we can have some really interesting conversations about the institutions, anti-institutions, and educations. And we hope that it's a productive evening for us, at least it's the evening. So to begin, from our last assembly, we decided to maybe focus on some more specific questions to guide the discussion this evening. And we divided the interventions and the presentations into 5 different groups. And the first questions I thought that we would talk about that are going to guide our discussions are the following. So what kind of relations can develop between educational processes and the context in which cultural practitioners operate, and how do these influence each other? What kind of languages can emerge from these contexts, and how can minor movements spread and organize on their own autonomously and create new spaces and forms of discussion that aren't under these hegemonic major institutions and economic circuits? And lastly, what forms of autonomous and alternative education activities can go on? So these are some of the questions that we were thinking we can think about while everyone is speaking and presenting. And at the end of each, let's say, subgroup, we'll have a mini discussion section, and you can also speak at the end or write down your questions in the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
And to begin this second assembly, we decided to start with a video with Andrea Stein. We met Andrea Stein some weeks ago, and so if Giacomo can do it, we can see some pieces of this video.
Andrea Stein is an anthropologist who knew David Graeber closely, and we met together in Italy in the woods to read some of David Graeber's texts and discuss about our relationship to these texts and anarchism and some of his various reading texts, and how they've also been translated in Italy, and then of course the relationship with Italy and the text in America. So we will just show a few minutes of the video that we created to begin. Thank you.
La violenza, la burocrazia e il lavoro interpretativo. Questo saggio esplora alcuni ambiti della vita umana che mettono a disagio gli antropologi, ovvero quegli ambiti esistenziali resi possibili dalla violenza, che sono caratterizzati dalla rigidità, dalla cialtroneria, dalla smemoratezza e dalla totale stupidità. Per violenza non intendo qui quegli atti occasionali e spettacolari che ci vengono in mente non appena viene evocata questa parola, quanto piuttosto quelle forme noiose, monotone e onnipresenti di violenza strutturale che definiscono le condizioni stesse della nostra esistenza. Quelle minacce, più o meno velate, di uso della forza fisica, contenute nelle norme che determinano dove è possibile sedersi, stare in piedi, mangiare o bere nei parchi o negli altri spazi pubblici, fino a delle vere e proprie minacce, a delle intimidazioni fisiche o a delle aggressioni che puntellano l'imposizione di tacite norme di genere. E questo secondo me è un incipit bello potente, perché ci fa capire come tante piccole norme, tanti divieti strutturano l'impossibilità di immaginare la differenza. Non possiamo mangiare in un parco, non possiamo fare una festa in università, non possiamo camminare liberamente in una proprietà perché probabilmente è privata e quindi non ci si può passare, c'è un cancello. Non possiamo, se non consumiamo, toglierci la mascherina, per essere attuali, senza voler essere assolutamente né negazionisti né niente, ma mi sono sempre posto in questi periodi il perché: se io sono seduto a un tavolo e pago posso togliermela, se sono seduto a un tavolo in un parco dove non pago non posso togliermela. E questo, diciamo, è proprio il discorso delle zone morte che può creare nell'immaginazione la strutturazione di norme gerarchiche, burocratiche, calate dall'alto e non costruite da una comunità consapevole dal basso.
So that was just a little piece of our reading in the woods and discussion in the woods. And before really beginning, we'd like to also invite Andris and Zasha and Chiara Figone to speak about CSD, our Critical Studies Department, and to introduce this evening, if they'd like to take the word.
Hello, everyone, and it's a pleasure to see that we are so many actually present here on the Zoom, notwithstanding it's summer and many of you are probably somewhere on the vacation. So thank you for actually to Critical Studies Department for having once again put together this amazing set of so many and interesting different people from all over the world. And I think that today, after the last assembly, many kind of interrogations and questions were opened up. And I really liked also the fact that you somehow together with Andrea, and it was not just like kind of a fancy location that you selected where to read the writings of David Graeber. It's actually that Andrea some years ago decided to abandon the city, and he's living in Liguria. So he's actually, that's a place like where he lives. So he decided to make that choice and actually to go away from the big city and to become a kind of, like to set in a semi-rural kind of place. So thinking about many questions that were opened up and many experiences that we saw last time, I think today we could proceed in that direction maybe rather than, I don't think we will give any exhaustive answers, but we could open up more kind of questions and inquiries. After the last assembly, we had a very interesting discussion with Zinaida, Nika, Zasha, and Paola, which is also available online about let's say the meaning and why we have selected to call it the anti-education map and what it would mean. And that was a very stimulating discussion. I think this can be like this assembly will push this kind of inquiry even furthermore. And I think that today this will be more of an informal meeting, and during which we can think of the questions that we already sent out and that Emma read. But thinking today about what we are going to talk about and what we are going to do, I would like to propose another kind of keyword, and thinking also of some recent experiences that I saw, for example, with the archive space, of which I will just talk in a second. I would like to bring forward another keyword, which could be also generosity. And I was thinking like, what is like really, okay, my contribution to the whole kind of museum of care. And I couldn't come up with another kind of idea that maybe I'm generously also dedicating my time, which is an asset which is still kind of not expropriated to me, and I'm dedicating this, like, let's say, also to the project of Critical Studies Department. Maybe we can sort of extend, like, thinking of what generosity is and how that could become maybe also a tool, a kind of a political tool that we all could use. So I also started to think about that because recently, some 2 weeks ago, I was part of a presentation at the archive space in Milan, and Chiara made a wonderful dinner to all the people. Maybe Chiara, afterwards you could speak about that. And this really made me think also about that sometimes really like these kind of small gestures can be extremely important. And once again, generosity could be, let's say, the key word that I would use when I remember that particular experience. So maybe I will now pass the floor to Zasha and then to Chiara. And Chiara, maybe you can explain also what is like the concept of how the archive space works in Milan. And then I'm very happy that today we will also speak more about David Graeber's texts, and Steve Batchelor and Nick and others will try to contextualize what we are talking about, the anti-education and to contextualize it with the work of David Graeber. So I'm yeah, thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to be part of it. And I would pass now word to Zasha and then to Karen.
I'm going to pass the baton on very soon to Chiara, just to say hello, everyone. I'm really, really thankful that you can all make it. I know how late it is in some places, how early it is in others. Thank you so much for taking time to be together. And many interesting things did come out of the last assembly, and I really hope that this becomes a safe place. And that was one of the key questions I had, you know, where is the safe digital space? I know many of the presentations today will be thinking about this as they speak, you know, possibly, just from the little I know of them. And this is something I would like to address, and what kind of solidarities a museum of care could have. So maybe we come back in the discussion, but I'm going to pass to Chiara.
Hello, everyone. So you're going very quick, you know, Zasha. All right. So yeah, first of all, I'm very sorry that I missed the first gathering. So I had the chance to catch up a little bit through other participants, but I'm really happy that I can share time with you today. And well, to probably summarize in a few words what Andres was attempting to say is that, of course, Archive is an art space, is a publishing house, but we see ourselves as a space of gathering also, and most of our programming relies on the fact that sharing food, sharing sounds, sharing space can be exactly as you know, passing knowledges along in a very nice and maybe less usual or normative way than other forms of exchange of knowledge. So I guess that the aspect of cooking together and sharing food and preparing food for any event, any gathering that we have or that we had, because we started many years ago in Berlin, and since then we decided to also open in Milan, where we are trying really to see how we can ground ourselves in a city that is not a city of any of the member of archives. So it's always very interesting to see how you can ground yourself and find you really place your roots. And I guess that the sharing food, cooking together, experiencing, you know, maybe different narrative that can come out of that is very beneficial in getting to know everyone involved in the group, and then everyone that wants to share space and time with us. And of course, the question of care, the question of conviviality, of hospitality, of solidarity are very central in our practice, in our practices, since we are a sort of ensemble of practitioners working in a quite informal and decentralized way. I don't know if, Andres, you wanted me to do this sort of a bit of information about archive. Maybe that already happened last time, but so I guess that's, you know, even though we have been you know, situating ourselves in different regions, in different contexts, because some of us are living also in the three places where we have spaces, which are Berlin, Milan, and Dakar. Other of us are located in places where we don't have a site. So of course, it's very difficult sometimes to feel, you know, the presence of the others when there is no space to occupy together. But I guess that's a little bit what we are attempting to do with this organization that is really based on the commitment of many people to trying to find other ways also to experience art, to produce arts, to share art, and of course to really use art as a site to ask the questions that are very pressing. Some of them already mentioned even at the beginning of this gathering. So yeah, maybe I even talk already too much, sorry. For the one who knows me, I need to be stopped because I'm a danger. I can talk for hours.
Thank you so much. And I hope that if you, or some of you, if you happen to come to Milan, then you can of course be part of and visit the archive books and their space in Milan. It was just that one part of this discussion went or continued physically there during that dinner. So that's why it was very interesting. And I hope that together with Chiara and with Dasha, we'll be able to really think of how to formalize afterwards like this beautiful experience into a publication later on. I would like now that we would maybe pass to the next speakers, and I think it's really wonderful that we have Steve here, and maybe Steve could comment and really speak about. Steve was a friend of David, and so maybe he could speak about David's texts in relationship to education and to the whole inquiry that we're taking forward. So I would pass the floor to Steve. Thanks.
Thank you. For those of you who know David's work well and have read interviews with him, one of the things that he was fond of mentioning was that there are really only 3 European institutions that have survived more or less intact from the Middle Ages. The first is the Catholic Church, the second, the British monarchy, and the third, the university system. And I think that it's those 3 is not a coincidence. All 3 rely on and reproduce a similar process of individuation, which we talked about in the last reading group. And all 3 institutions end up creating similar structural results. In the case of the Catholic Church, it's there to preserve this great unitary God. In the case of the British monarchy, of course, it's to preserve the great sovereign. And then the university system preserves and upholds the great thinkers. And in fact, the educational system, the university system as we know it today, really arose as a result of the first 2. David, in his work, has mentioned how the very first philosophers, if we think of ancient Greece, they didn't think of philosophy and learning as an individual, isolated kind of solitary pursuit. They thought of it as a collective practice, a dialogic practice that one had to do with others, and that the learning came as a result of that process of dialogue, but that in time, the philosophy changed. And in fact, we can, I think, see with the rise of the Catholic Church that a lot of the thinking and learning retreated into the monastery. And we read in our last group, David's unpublished piece about the beyond the monastic self, where he argues that any ideas are really the result of this dialogic process, but there are now bureaucracies or institutions that are quite good at erasing that dialogue and presenting what appears to be the product of great thinkers. And in fact, the university arose first out of the monasteries, and then as a result of sovereigns who wanted there to be a collection of thinkers who wouldn't automatically say yes to whatever the king or queen was thinking, that the sovereign actually wanted some neutral advice, and that the university arose out of that as a place where the sovereign could help preserve or protect these thinkers, could solicit their advice, and because the sovereign is the sovereign, he or she could choose to ignore that advice or not. But at least there was a way of letting there be some alternate ideas rather than just the court itself. And so David makes this connection that really the universities arose as almost these quasi-court jesters, where you could bring together people and have them think, and the sovereign could elect to ignore or not ignore whatever it was they had to say. So universities developed, or the educational system as we know it, developed out of this monastic tradition, but also a monarchical tradition. And gradually it shifted into an academic pursuit where the sovereigns could count on these thinkers to produce ideas that that the sovereign could choose to ignore or not ignore, but that also weren't necessarily beholden to the Catholic Church. And so really, we can think of the university as the secular version of a monastery, and that it actually serves some similar purposes, because as an institution, it was designed first to cater to the church, and then to the sovereign, and then as a place where the sovereign could determine or choose what he or she felt was truth. And so the university became synonymous with the secular pursuit of discovering the truth. And in their early version, well, up until the 1950s, in fact, universities were largely organized by the people who ran them. So they were organized like guilds during from the feudal times, where the professors were the ones who ran the universities. Since the 1950s, that's changed. We still think of the universities doing similar sorts of things in terms of producing scholarship, producing knowledge, but really the universities became these institutions dedicated to producing and sustaining a tradition of great thinkers. And so they really became these thinking machines that the sovereign could ignore or rely upon. But what we have these days is a secular version of that. And what David has pointed out in Bullshit Jobs quite effectively is that in this pursuit of truth, the assumption in a university is that it's a meritocracy. And universities have proven themselves since the 1950s really to be anything but a meritocracy. I would imagine that David would probably argue that even before the 1950s, they weren't necessarily meritocracies because of this idea of there never really being a great thinker, that any great thinker is really the product of all the thought that comes before that person. But especially since the 1950s, the idea has been that universities are places of almost pure meritocracy, in theory, that is, but they're anything but that. And part of the reason for that is because there is no individual thinking. So one person's merit isn't necessarily comparable to another person's merit. There is no individual thinking that goes on, yet the Academy's job is to preserve and defend the sanctity of this idea. But really, knowledge production is performative as much as it is descriptive and explanatory. So that has especially become the case since the 1950s. In Bullshit Jobs, David quotes Benjamin Ginsberg, who's written this fascinating study that details how administrators were able to stage a coup and were able to take over the universities and really transform them into bureaucracies that don't even produce great thinkers, don't rely on meritocracy, but basically are there to just churn out the same class of managers and that this process is a performative process as much as it is an analytical process. And so it's now the job of professors in many cases, not so much to actually generate knowledge, but to perform all the tasks that go along with believing knowledge is being produced. And so the requirements now that are placed on professors, it's always been a sort of a publish or perish kind of world, but especially since this coup led by administrators, where now administrators expect professors to tabulate the number of publications they've submitted versus the number that have been accepted. That they're supposed to assess the impact factor, where they place those articles, with certain journals being more prestigious than others, and but which lends itself to the idea of a meritocracy, but behind the scenes is often anything but, because this relies often on friendships and people who know each other. That's often how articles get placed in journals these days. So scholars since the 1950s, with this coup by administrators, that they really are shaping, they're playing a role in shaping the very object that they ostensibly study. And so these days, with the requirements that are being put on them, knowledge production really is becoming increasingly a performative gesture. And that universities these days operate more in the service of creating and sustaining bullshit jobs than they do in actually producing knowledge. And part of that is because of all the demands that are placed on professors to do things other than teach and read. And David makes a point in Bullshit Jobs of pointing out how it used to be before the 1950s that professors were sort of left to their own devices. You could even think of this in the Middle Ages, where the king could decide whether or not to listen, or could just laugh off the professors. This is less the case now, because so much of their time, and David relies on some quantitative studies that show just how much of their time is spent filling out papers, paperwork, a box ticking, I think he calls it. And so universities are really these institutions that serve to create the facade of there being ongoing great thinkers, but that there's never been a great thinker to begin with. And that this has over time reduced the imagination of the very people who are sort of the outliers who often come up with the innovative ideas. Again, not on their own, but David makes a point of complaining about how universities used to be places where the crackpots could go and sort of have their crackpot ideas, and that's much less the case. And so the limits that are being placed on the imaginations of the educators is also being reduced. So this made me, David in his work talked a great deal about how history since the Middle Ages has really been a process of reducing humans' imagination. It reminded me of how he ends Lost People, his ethnography of people in Madagascar. And he concludes that book by saying that the fundamental measure of our humanity lies in what we cannot know about each other. People's humanity, in other words, is inseparable from their capacity to surprise us. And I think what we find in going through his work and relating it to education is that increasingly over time, education has become a bureaucracy that is meant to limit people's imaginations so that there are fewer and fewer surprises. And this is, of course, to the great detriment of humanity. I will pass now to, who's next on the agenda?
We're close with time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very interesting to be thinking about, especially the relationship between professors and us students, and we're coming together with both of these perspectives. So thank you. Then the next, we're going to start with the rest of the guests. We have, like I said, 5 different groups. We've kind of divided us into different groups so that at the end of each group we can comment and have discussion divided up rather than everything piling up at the end. So just to begin, for the first group, we have Nika and Zinaida and Ekaterina. If you want to begin our first mini group. Thank you.
Yeah, first I will be very short. So first I want to say that Long Live Critical Study Department, thank you so much for taking over this curatorial challenge, and yeah, internally grateful to you all. And specifically for choosing the theme education, because we are the museum, and this is the 2 institutions for now, not so much church, but academia and museums, who is producing and maintaining symbolic order. So in order to change something, we really better reorganize these 2 institutions as much as we can. I just want to say that the Museum of Care was born in the memory of David. We wrote a couple of articles about museums and specifically Museum of Care just last year before he died. But he, of course, as Steve was saying, was very critical of academia and always on the search of other places or other territories where people could be free and could be taken care of. We talk with him a lot about my Soviet experience. That's all territory to be explored. And Zinaida will talk about that, about самодеятельность and do-it-yourself, Soviet culture. That's extremely important for ideology of Museum of Care. Also, like Alexander Bogdanov and Prolet Cult. That's we wrote together with David in our essay in the art world that's published in eFlux. And so I just want to say, for my part, taking care of Museum of Care is an attempt to also try to create and provide for some people a space where this type of ideas could be nurtured and developed. And yeah, and I hope it will work out somehow.
Thank you. I don't know if Zinaida or Ekaterina, if you would like to say something. If not, we can.
Zinaida?
I mean, do you mean whether I'm ready to start or whether I would like to say something in advance?
Both.
Yeah, I'm ready to start.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I also would like to share the screen, so maybe if you can make me a co-host, it would be helpful. Okay, yeah, because I'm going to talk about the concept, so I think it will be easier if some words can be visualized. Okay, well, I think for some reason I cannot switch the screen, but I think you still can see, right? Even if it's with the black screen. Yeah, so I'm going to talk today about самодеятельность, which is a Russian concept which can be translated in English as self-activity, which is close to the literal meaning of the word. So my goal today is a little bit to say about how the fate of this concept, social practice and institution differs. So in a way, I will talk about самодеятельность in these three different aspects. So самодеятельность as a concept, how it came to being, how it traveled, how it changed the meaning. About самодеятельность as a social practice, at least how we can know it in the Russian context, and how самодеятельность got institutionalized and how it changed perhaps the original idea. So in other words, I'm going to talk about how whatever concept you mean, but in this specific case, the concept of самодеятельность is plastic and available for politicization, appropriation, institutionalization, and then eventually depolitization or repolitization and the change of the meaning. And in the Russian context, самодеятельность is close, so is a concept that is that originally, in a way, brings together the idea about the everyday life and the material expression of this material of this everyday life. That's why I put it like byt, which is a Russian word to say everyday life, as expressed in the art and technology, which is sometimes separated and sometimes not separated. But well, I hope it's not going to be very confusing. So this is the schematic. Very schematic structure of how at least I reconstructed in my work, and how I show how the Russian concept of самодеятельность came into being. And my main point here is that it traveled from German, from one specific German discourse on the one hand, and from also a very specific moral discourse from the Scottish tradition, and particular author of Samuel Smiles. So the two German concepts, meaning Selbstbetätigung and Selbsttätigkeit, both meaning like the capacity to animate yourself, or the capacity to do something by yourself. Eventually, by the end of the 19th century, were used by different philosophers, including Spinoza, Feuerbach, and Marx, and finally got stabilized in the Marx work in relation to the idea of the alienation of labor. So basically, Selbsttätigkeit, according to Marx, is exactly the ability which allows the labor not to be alienated. So as long as you are able to reflect about your own activity and about your own labor, and in this way to be the master of your work and the master of your labor and the owner of your labor, it is not alienated. So I simplify, but more or less it's an important idea. And this idea was known in Russia, and it was borrowed from the German language. Quite a different story from the Scottish author called Samuel Smiles, who wrote a book called Self-Help, where he basically celebrated the emergence of a new modern person, free of some traditional patterns of behavior, able to start his own life outside of the community, and perhaps to build an example by himself, to be entrepreneurial, but entrepreneurial not in the contemporary sense, but in the sense of like being able to start something by himself, to initiate something, to have initiative. And this book, which consisted of the kind of explication of this philosophy and of the celebration of this type of a new man, and also supplied with multiple examples from, in Smiles' case, from the Scottish and history, was extremely popular in Europe in the second part of the 19th century. This book was translated in many European languages, and it was also translated in Russian. And interestingly enough, it was also translated as this word самодеятельность. So both the German concept of Selbsttätigkeit with its own history and its own intellectual history, and the English concept of self-help with its own intellectual tradition and kind of the moral philosophy behind, both these words were translated in Russian as самодеятельность and got stabilized, let's say, in the 90s of the 19th century. So what is important here is just to understand that the concepts travel, and the concepts have their own histories, and they can get stabilized in a particular place by bringing together the ideas that were not originally thought as coming together. Then, already in Russia, this word at the very end of the 19th century, which means just before the revolution, well, or close to the revolutionary time, when the revolutionary moods were already spread in the society, самодеятельность became a symbol of the change. So самодеятельность as a word became a kind of motto that allowed to bring together very different social groups and operated as let's say, a political slogan in demand. So whatever many different ideas, many different political ideas, including solidarity, political activism, social responsibility, participation in the public life, and so on and so forth, could be called at that time with the word of самодеятельность. And in this sense, while if we analyze the discourse of different political parties that participated in the political struggle at the end of the 19th century, they all used the concept of самодеятельность. They used it slightly differently, but they all used it. And for us, it's a kind of it's a mark that it was possible to mobilize people by referring to this kind of discourse and to this kind of semantics. Now I will come back to this slide later, but I would like to show you maybe a couple of quotes for when how самодеятельность as a concept was used back then. So, for example, Dostoevsky, it's a quote where he referred to the lack of самодеятельность, meaning lack of agency, but something that he would aspire to see in the Russian society. If the people is rather bestial, it is so because it was immobilized, deprived of the agency. So agency, I translate here as agency the word самодеятельность, reduced to the state of a fiscal unit. But this this is the way Dostoevsky is trying to explain why we don't have enough of citizens in the sense of responsible citizens and active political subjects. So we need more самодеятельность to have more of them. Or, for example, this is the second quote is from the book, from this Russian translation of the book Self-Help, where the translator himself explains that самодеятельность emerging from the current reforms should awake the Russian society. So, in other words, самодеятельность works as a concept, meaning the aspiration for a better democratic future, so to say. Another, yeah.
Zandy, I'm very, very sorry, but I have this horrible task. But we really have a lot of guests, and we're already around 10 minutes of your intervention. So
10. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well,
clock,
then I just quickly.
Just maybe we can return to this further on, and maybe we can come, somehow summarize it, and then.
I can summarize. It's okay. I can summarize.
I'm really sorry, but we have to go on. Thank you.
Well, okay. So the word of самодеятельность, however, was after the revolution was very quickly appropriated by the party and was then used as a concept to apply for the newly established institutions responsible for the, for example, for the arts where people would be involved. And well, I think I don't have to go time to go to the story where Nika invited me to go, but so I think what is important for me to say is that this concept then was again repoliticized in a very different sense. And rather than referring to the common and widespread political initiative and the emergence of spontaneous political forces, it started to denote basically the popular arts and crafts, and was basically localized in a very specific niche of culture. By being by using this word in this particular institutional history. So in a way, the attachment of this word to a specific institution killed its meaning as a politically emancipative tool or politically free concept, and basically became kind of appropriated by the state in the official vocabulary. Well, yeah, sorry that I took too much time, but it's just it's a complex story. It's hard to to say in 3 minutes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for having introduced this term, and I'm sure that we can return to this and we can discuss it also during the next assemblies, because it's a very kind of interesting topic that you brought, that you put on the table. Maybe we could pass now to Ekaterina as our next guest, and then maybe Nika can roll up this part, and then we will move on with the program, which is a very long list. And thank you for all for being here and for participating. So Ekaterina, the floor is yours.
I don't know if Ekaterina is with us.
If not, Nika, then maybe we can, would you like to intervene, and then we can go on and proceed with the rest of the guests.
Yeah, we can go on with the second group.
Yeah, maybe I just wait. Maybe I can just talk about the positive side of самодеятельность, because as Zinaida was saying, it was very political, and the fact that it was appropriated by the powers in Soviet Union doesn't mean that we should not return to the original term, and that's why I make this connection between the Museum of Care as an ideal space, anti-institutional space that's maybe, hopefully, or like have a little hope to develop that concept. That is extremely important. I think it's a big contribution of the early Soviet culture that now people started to return to the humanity. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think it's a very interesting term. We should first maybe agree how we translate it, and then consider how we could possibly use it or repoliticize it in a completely new way. So I would say, Emma, that we could pass to the second group now, and maybe you could introduce them, and then we could listen to them.
Great. So for our second group, again, we'll share our questions at the end.
Yeah, we start with Axel or Tanya that present IAFS, an emerging physical community. If there is someone who can speak about.
Then afterwards, we'll have Kulsum Khan, Simin Anjum, and Sakib Mohammed Butt. Sorry if I butcher your name. Elena Mazzi, Parag Tendal, Kandambari Koli Tandal. And then at the end, discussions. So we'll...
we can start with Axel and Tanya.
Hi, everyone. My name is Axel. Tanya's not here. yes, hold on, let me get my screen. So I am in Eugene, Oregon, USA, and I'm here to present about the IAFS Free School. So the free school started in San Francisco during 2020 and was a result of the rupture of the San Francisco Art Institute in March 2020. And I wasn't yet part of IAFS at that point. The story of the rupture of San Francisco Art Institute is complex and nuanced and full of emotion and trauma for the students, faculty, staff, alumni. And I'll put a link in the chat if you're curious about this story about what happened with the San Francisco Art Institute. But basically it collapsed during the pandemic. And people who were involved with the San Francisco Art Institute came together to create an alternative to fill the void of what was lost and potentially create something better. And so in the fall of 2020, let's see here, they started the very first semester, and the first semester theme was how to become a 21st century art school. And the participants came up with a statement of pedagogy as well as some guiding principles. The statement of pedagogy is at IAFS, we undertake teaching and learning as a free exchange of mutual aid and benefit in order to develop the expressive skills, critical engagement, and artistic practices of our community members and our community itself. Just as a note, IAFS doesn't stand for anything. It is the exact opposite of San Francisco Art Institute. And so during that first semester, the participants came up with several principles, guiding principles. The first ones are about who we are. Number one, we are a community that wants to make art together. 2, we aim to develop a community of care, kindness, healing, and trust that strengthens our creativity and capacity for collective action and resistance. 3, we are inspired by the Bay Area's radical spirit and invested in participating in our communities wherever we find them. 4, we acknowledge the fullness of our feelings by rubbing our hearts. The next set of principles are about how we make together. 5, we invite the exploration of all media and genres without gatekeeping. We appreciate the development of technique to form deeper connections between craft and concept. 7, we engage in mature practices of open-mindedness, patience, and productive critique to co-create powerful languages of engagement and empowerment. And 8, we grow our understanding of history and critical theory through reading, dialogue, and listening to push our art practices to make meaningful differences in the present. And the last set of principles are about how we organize. So number 9 is we undertake the organization of our school as a form of art. We make decisions democratically and administer and implement them cooperatively. We commit to honest communication and transparent information. 12, we deepen, not just grow our community at an intentional pace that supports enjoyment, inclusion, and participation. 13, we believe in decolonization and resist historic systems of oppression and how they may inform current conditions and our relationships with one another. And finally, 14, we seek to connect our school with other free schools and similarly principled organizations in other fields to sustain larger networks for sharing. So I became involved with IAFS during the second semester, which was the spring of 2021. And it's funny because I actually found out about IAFS through the Museum of Care. I came to one of the assemblies in January or February, and somebody made an announcement about it. And so I participated in a couple of classes during the spring. One of them was the Visual Assembly Lab, which was also came out of the Museum of Care and other projects with David Graeber. And so this was a months-long class where we came together every week to discuss the concept of visual assembly and practice it together on Zoom. But we also did have an in-person experiment with visual assembly in San Francisco in June. And the other class that I participated in was called Craft. And so for the craft class, we met once a month for 4 months, and we began the class by studying William Morris, and we read Art and Labor, as well as, what was the other one? It was The Origins of Ornamental Art. So during the next months, we read about and talked about Bauhaus, as well as the Mingai movement in Japan. And we also had various skill shares and learning how to do stenciling and pochoir techniques, as well as some other paper crafts. And so on our first meeting, we were really excited about William Morris and what we read, and decided that we wanted to do an art project together. And so we are putting together an artist book based on William Morris's 6 conditions for utopia. And then we, in our continued talks, started to realize that a lot of William Morris's 6 conditions were related to things that David Graeber had written. So let me just read quickly the 6 conditions. So the first one is the extinction of poverty. The second one is leisure. Third, avoidance of wasteful work. Fourth, care and beauty of the earth. Fifth, education according to capacity. And sixth, the abolition of class distinctions, real, not formal. And so we made a connection to Graeber, of course, with bullshit jobs and the avoidance of wasteful work. And then in Fragments of an Anarchist Anthropology, Graeber gives 3 ways to alleviate global poverty. I'll read them really quick because they're wonderful. Let's see, an immediate amnesty on international debt, an immediate cancellation of all patents and other intellectual property rights related to technology more than 1 year old, and the elimination of all restrictions on global freedom of travel or residence. So our book project, we're bringing together William Morris's 6 conditions with David Graeber, and we're illustrating them using some of the techniques that we shared with each other in skill shares. And we are opening this project up to anybody who wants to participate. And the cool thing about it is that it's kind of an ongoing project, because we're going to have all of the pages downloadable, and the way that we're binding the book is completely by just by hand, by folding, so anybody can create their own book. And so I will post a PDF in the chat that has all kinds of information about it in case you are interested in participating. And so the last thing that I want to just mention about IAFS is that we are currently doing course development for the fall of 2021. And we have a bunch of exciting courses that we're going to be voting on this coming week. And again, anybody is welcome to join and propose a class and join the classes for free. We meet typically on Thursday nights or Sunday mornings, and that's USA time. So just a couple of things to get you excited. Let's see, Joseph Albers is my boyfriend is the name of one class, and this is going to be a color theory class. We have some screenings of various movies with some discussions. We have crafting the Dharma, embroidery as spiritual practice. We also have a proposal from Yash, who is a regular at the Museum of Care. He is going to put together a class on digital privacy and art. And then I am collaborating with a group of people to put together a class in December. The current working title is Burning Down the House, Breaking Down and Rebuilding Art Institutes. And so we're going to meet for several weeks in December, and potentially a culmination of that will be the development of a DIY MFA and a DIY PhD. So that's it. I hope I didn't go over time. I wasn't keeping track of that. Thank you.
Sure,
Thank you so much.
If you share this PDF, it could be great. And so we can go home with Kulsum, Seaman, and Sakib. Sorry for my pronunciation.
Hi.
Hi.
So Kulsum and Sakib are not here, so I'll just go ahead and share with you guys. Can I get permission to share?
Yes, they maybe
Yeah. The one with my full name.
You can do now. You can share now.
Okay, perfect.
Okay,
we just want to ask everyone, sorry, to try to stay between 5 to 8 minutes because we have so many guests and it's all really, really interesting. So we want to get through everyone. Okay. Sorry to be the police of the time, but if you can try, that would be really great. Thank you.
So our project is called the Craft of Unviolence, and it's a socially collaborative project which me, Kulsum and Sakib are doing with the women residents of our neighborhood. So I'll just brief you guys a little about the project. So we are doing these series of gatherings with the women residents of our neighborhood, Jamia Nagar, to collectively engage in conversation and reflect and respond to our socio-political realities in the form of embroidery. What we are trying to do is inscribe our personal and collective memories on shawls by working collaboratively with these people who have actively or silently participated in the protest. I'll tell you guys about these protests in the next slide. So we are trying to collaborate with them through the traditional process of embroidery, zari, and beading, which has a cultural significance with us, especially where we live, and the attempt to engage in other conversations as well and address a range of issues within the socio-political fabric. And also as artists who are born and brought up in these neighborhoods, we locate ourselves directly in the middle of the ongoing conflict, the ongoing urgencies. And this is our attempt to artistically explore the possibilities that are, possibilities enclosed within collective making and thinking through the mediums of embroidery, performance, and community engagement. So I'll just tell you guys a little about our neighborhood. This is a Muslim majority neighborhood in the corner of the capital, and it is often unfairly tagged as a Muslim ghetto, and it is, often discriminated against. So right now, with the increase in nationalism in India, there has been a rise in hate crimes towards Muslims and other minorities. So especially in a time like this neighborhood has become kind of a safe space for Muslims and other minorities. And also last year, a citizenship was passed by the Indian government, which was very discriminatory. And in Jamia Nagar, a movement protest started against this bill, and it turned out to be a historical event. So people came up with this counter strategy, and they occupied highways and public roads. And this was later adopted by different cities and different neighborhoods throughout the country, and it became a massive movement. And also smaller things developed out of it, like people came up with these movable libraries, there were community kitchens, there were other sorts of cultural stuff that was happening. And with COVID and the abrupt the abrupt end to this movement, we felt that this neighborhood, there was a need to create a dialogue on the ongoing situations with all the unrest that is there, and also the need for a safe space to people to be able to talk about what is happening and to deal with it collectively. So we started the series of embroidery sessions where, we would get together with our neighbors, with the residents, people who have participated in the project, in the protests that happened earlier. And we organized these get-togethers on terraces, in public or private spaces, where we embroider together and we also talk about stuff. Also, picking embroidery as a medium, or just as an expression. One of the reasons for that was, in our culture, it is very politically charged. When there were kings and queens, embroidery was used as a labor, and the people who used to do this craft, they were often alienated from the objects of embroidery that they used to make. So this is also an attempt to, like challenge that in a way. And also it is traditionally done by women. It's perceived to be a women's craft, and also for a lot of women who are on their own, embroidery is also a means of survival for most of these women. Also, we wanted to do gatherings because there was a need for open, safe spaces for women to get together, a space where they could speak and also deal collectively about the ongoing situations. And we also think of it as a therapeutic intervention into the community. Our project attempts to challenge socio-cultural and political structures and opens up certain conversations which could rupture the boundaries set by the society. In this project, we are aspiring to give voice to Muslim minority women who are usually absent from the mainstream political discourses. Our project breaches the boundaries of institution. It fit itself in the minoritarian discourse and not in the majoritarian discourse, which is already being propagated by the state to serve its image. And also the CA and RC protests that we are talking about, it was a people's movement against the state. So when we fit this module here, it automatically becomes a tool of resistance to the same authorities. Another thing is that we are trying to break free the process from socio-political boundaries. The gatherings that we are organizing, they free us from the boundaries that society has placed onto us as women, as minorities. We are also aspiring to give voice to women, and with this act of voicing, we hope that a new language emerges, a language that has its own symbols and syntax. And we are interested in that language because this language will be free of the institutional hegemony. So that's about it.
Thank you, Simon. If you want to share something with us in the chat, or if you have any website, you can share it. And it's really amazing. Thank you.
We can keep that if anyone has any questions at the end of this first group, or you can already write it in the chat.
Yeah, and we can go on with Elena Mazzi.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yeah, and Elena just presented actually the book in Bolzano.
Exactly.
Actually, by the way, designed by Archive Books, if I'm correct. So this is yet another collaboration within our network, and this was it is a very interesting publication. And with this, maybe we can tackle a little bit, and we just did already with the previous presentation, the issue of how can we actually talk or think about smaller communities or indigenous communities, because this project was developed while Elena was in Patagonia, and so you can tell us about the book and about the project. So I pass the floor to you, Elena.
Thank you, Andris. So yeah, sorry, there's a little bit of echo. I'm actually in the exhibition right now at the moment, because yeah, as Andris said, we presented the book yesterday that I have here with me, and thank you, Chiara. It's very beautiful. So I can just scroll it like this. It's in 3 languages because we decided it was very important to also do it in Spanish beside Italian and English, also, as a way also to connect with the communities and also to include their original texts, because there are some texts also by the Mapuche population. And so yeah, and basically I can share some images so you can have an idea of what has been done. But I was just thinking to generally speaking about the project. So yeah, so we used jewelry as a medium to connect and translate what the community there has been doing since few years. So what's happening basically in Patagonia is that there are several multinationals that are trying, of course, to just buy more and more properties and to exploit the land. So the Mapuche are really well connected and strong in fighting together. And I met them the first time more than 10 years ago, my first trip to Argentina for different reasons. But at the same time, I was developing another project in Treviso that was kind of investigating what the Lega, the right party, was doing in Italy, and especially in the city of Treviso, that is really connotated by the right wing. And just by chance, I learned about this story, like this huge fight in between Benetton company, so the clothes company in Italy, and the Mapuche population. There was a juridical cause going on already since a few years. And when I then went to Argentina, I met this the first little community who decided to call in a legal process the big Italian company. So that was the first step. And actually it was also how and why I met, you can see, Mauro Mijan, a very well-known activist there. And he brought me around to see all the lands that have been fenced out by Benetton first, but also by other companies, as I said. And so the population didn't have access to the water anymore, couldn't cross the land anymore. And it's crazy because it's Patagonia. So you always, in your imagination, you always think about infinite and incredible landscape with no borders, with no fences, but in the end, everything is fenced off. So it was really visually also incredible. But what was most incredible even was that Benetton created a museum there. And in this museum, he created a counter narration. So he created the narration that it was good for himself to keep doing this. So basically, he said in the museum that Mapuche population doesn't exist, or at least they don't exist in Argentina as we know it. And I remember there was the RAI, the Italian public television, filming there, and there were Mapuche people outside the museum just saying, we are here, we are alive, so you are trying to tell another story, no? And this from a visual point of view and from a museum, institutional museum, is what we have to criticize very strongly altogether. So that's why I decided to start this project, and I used the jewels as a medium because jewels, it's also like a symbol of the economical exchange Mapuche used to have with the colonizers from the Spanish domination. So it was really a way for them to say, like, we also can have a voice in this dialogue, in this exchange, and we also can decide how the dialogue can be settled down. No? But now they are really super poor, and of course they are discriminated. So these are just few pictures from some communities that we met. And so I went back last year, thanks to an Italian grant, and I started to meet all these communities also with the help of an Italian association of activists, Già Basta. And with them, we had access to also like difficult communities to get in, and also to speak together, and also to try to find a way to create a counter narration to the other narration that just a symbol of what you find in the when you cross the lands. So you have several farms, and these farms have been properties of people who decided to join the genocide in the end of the 19th century. So how to reach the land, how to conquer it, it was a mix of European people that connected and decided to create the state of Argentina. And all these farms that you find are still properties of German families, or Russian families, or English families. The same Benetton bought 1 million hectares from an English company, an English family. And sometimes you find these symbols of violence when you cross them. So this was the entrance of a German farm, used to be connected to a Nazi family. And they still show off power in the same way they used to do it in the 19th century, you know, like catch 2 pumas and install them in a very diagonal and visual powerful way in the entrance to show off. This was the climate camp we joined with the activists in February 2020, right before the pandemic happened. And these are some images of the space where I'm in, Argekunst. So basically the whole installation is a way to deconstruct the museum as we intended. So no vitrines, no walls are used to define the show, but it's an independent installation that will travel in several spaces, and that's why it's all the elements are fluctuating in the space. And basically the main narration is divided into 4 audio works that are in a way mandatory for the public to be listened to, and this gives you an introduction to the second step of the show, where you find I don't know why it's not scrolling anymore. Sorry. Okay, it's not scrolling anymore.
Well, it's okay. Thank you. It's really hard to see.
Yeah.
Oh, really? I don't know if you want to write on chat the title of the...
Yeah, I can send you some links so you can see the other part of the show that is not scrolling anymore.
And if it's okay, we can go on with this.
Yeah. Thank you.
Now we have Parag, Tandem, and Kadambari. Sorry again for my pronunciation. Parag. Okay, Kadambari. Okay.
Koli.
Colin? Okay.
Yes, hi.
We
can't hear you.
No. Turn
You're
on.
muted
Okay.
now.
It's all right now. Okay. You understand?
No, you start.
Okay, we would screen share and we would start with that.
Okay, you can share or not.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So, sorry. So we are in collective. We are visual artists and auto-ethnographers who belong to the indigenous Sonkoli fishermen community of Mumbai. Our art practice concerns about the identity and the loss of indigenous wisdom associated with the ocean. We founded the Tandem Fund of Archives in 2019. The Tandem Fund of Archives is a socially engaged archive and ethnographic pop-up museum of the Sonkolis fishermen folk of Mumbai. We are an artist collective, the co-founders of the collective Parag and myself, Kadambari. Tandem Fund in Chendiri Kolivada, Thane, a central suburb of Mumbai, was founded by the Tandale families at the beginning of the 14th century to help the Koli people economically during the period of necessity. We are resuming this fund in the context of a pool of archives. Sonkoli tribes are original inhabitants of the Greater Mumbai and Mumbai suburbs. Their bloodlines on the 7 islands stretch as far as back to the Stone Age. Their ancestors who have experienced the great empires rose and fell around them like an invasion of colonialism, imperialism. Generations after generations, coolies have fished and mended nets into their fishing villages as the world around them has changed. They are hemmed by unsustainable infrastructures. The fisherfolk community is struggling like the ocean around them because of the ever-encroaching megapolis in their fishing grounds and villages. Their rich estuaries are choking with pollutants. Currently, this community is going through post-diaspora. There are more than 40 Kolivadas in and around Mumbai. Each Kolivada has its own social and cultural practices. These villages are very much self-sufficient and self-sustaining lands, though the city has grown around them. These isolated villages have their own identities in Mumbai. An important part about Kolivadas is that they never depend on the city's so-called basic infrastructure. Kolivadas have their rich and natural resources and cultural existence. But in recent times, these Kolivadas are being seen as the land of opportunities. These villages are sea-facing lands, and others are discerning such lands as prime properties. Can we imagine the fishermen community without without an ocean front? We are very much concerned about the proper and ethical documentation of these indigenous tribes whose culture is on a verge of extinction. I now hand over to Parag. Yeah.
Thank you. So we did finished since 2019. We finished 2 pop-up museum, and Stories of Winning Sound Cycle 2 pop-up museum finished in March, and then lockdown started. But we are just sharing Cycle 2 pop-up museum, and because it's short, so we don't want to extend a lot of things. You can see, go and see on our website. It's still under construction, but there are a lot more projects which we have shared. So this is, we have our own language, and language which is about ocean, which has formed because of ocean. There are songs, there are poetries, there are poetries mostly by women. We are basically matriarchal community, and women's. There is a lot of women domination in our community. That's why I started with Kadambari first. We'll go on next slide. So stories of Anning Sound is that the way the city has developed and way our education has changed according to the system or upper class which has developed education. Our language is going slowly. We are losing our language. So we arranged a pop-up museum, and this pop-up museum is about the Chendani Koliwada, which is we are born in Chendani Koliwada. We have lost our language. Nobody speaks. We speak Marathi language or English mostly, and it's kind of comparative study between two fishing village. In between two fishing village, there is estuary called estuary which is Ullas River. So Vitava, still in Vitava, it's kind of 3 kilometers from in both Koliwadas, both villages, 3 kilometers is the distance, and still Vitava Koliwada speaks their language. And we thought, why not collect words from our Chendani Koliwa village and also Vitava village, and we did a pop-up museum of that. So this was socially engaged museum, and people would write words and meanings in Marathi and English. And this is Vitava Koliwada Ferry Wharf. This is a fishing port actually, where we displayed this second cycle museum. And on right side there is dictionary words. Words written by fellow villagemen. So this was we invited 4 folk bards from our Chendani village and Vitava village, and also one Pulve village poet who is very famous, and they shared their poems, 15 each, and Dhaularin, who is a woman poet. And we extracted words from these poetries, and we displayed them into museum. Next. So local fishermen, they wanted to show fishing nets. These are indigenous fishing net. These are the 2 samples, but there are more 15 to 16 objects more. There are a lot traditional artisanal fishing traps. Next. So we arranged a dry fish competition. Usually dry fish is consumed by local means villagers. You don't get dry fish in restaurants because it smells a lot. That's why it's they are consumed by indigenous people only. And we asked them to write recipes in local language, like our own language, Koli language, Sonkoli language, and we extracted words. So there are different activities from which we created different activities by which we can collect words. Next. There was film screening was there, and then we asked people to write their own views, and then we extracted the words. These are the fish movies related to ocean and urbanization. All of them are our friends. So next we'll do. We are making one book of recipe book called Ek Bagal Mein Chand Hoga, Ek Bagal Mein Rotiya. These are the lost recipes, and you can I'll share the link later, which you can share on your website. Next. These are some drawings I did in drawings of loss I did in this book. And next. So after lockdown, we started thinking our museum was closed totally for since March 2020 till now. So we started website also, but before that, I thought, why not start publishing books as evidence? Because I feel that these books are evidence that we are here, though people don't want us here on the Seven Island. And even Pop-up Museum is kind of a protest against what is going on around that. What people do are getting displaced, and many different activities are going against us, against our community. So we started this. Ai Maji Konala Pauli is Ramesh Nakhwa's book, and we just finished it in September 2020. And recently in July we finished second part of Damodar Shibukoli, and we are making dictionary of each village has different words and different language changes every 3 kilometers all the way. So we are making books of each village also. There are about 225 total villages, and from that 40 villages are fishing right now. Yeah, finish. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. You can share the website, of course, on chat. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
And now Ekaterina is with us, right?
Yeah, hi everyone. I haven't prepared any presentation, but I will show you now a website to let me
Don't worry.
turn on the demonstration. Yeah. So hi everyone. My name is Ekaterina Martinova. I'm a sociologist and a journalist from student journal called Doctor. And this journal was created by students and alumni from Moscow High School of Economics in 2017. And we identify ourselves as a magazine who criticizes modern social and humanitarian knowledge and the problems of higher education in Russia and in the world. So the past 3 years, we were publishing many articles about university problems, harassment problems in university, political persecution of Russian students, and other very tough topics that didn't usually cover in big media. So yeah, this year was pretty extraordinary for us because this April, our editorial and the four, yeah, I can hear some noise, and yeah, if that's possible, can you turn off your microphone, someone? Yeah, sorry, thank you. Yeah, so our office and the 4 house of our editors was raided, and my colleagues, Roman, Dasha Tishkevich, Alla Gutnikova, and Volodya Michalkin faced criminal charges for allegedly involving minors in unauthorized protests that haven't been called. Actually, we published a video in the end of January when we stated that it's legal to punish students for going to protests, and it's just a constitutional right to have different political opinions and views. So that's why in March, our state agency Roskomnadzor, they striked to YouTube, and we had to delete it. and we deleted this video. And after it, in the month, totally traded our editorial, and now it's almost 4 months and my colleagues and friends are sitting under house arrest, and we don't know if it will continue several months or it will end after the elections. But the situation is like this. Every week from April in Russia, different independent media outlets are raided or recognized foreign agents or undesired organizations, what is very, very bad. And yeah, it was very surprising for us that we were so big. We couldn't thought that we were so big that authorities will pay attention for us. But actually, yeah, it suddenly became that we are one of the biggest student media outlets in Russia. And it was very shocking and a very crisis moment for us as our horizontal organization. We don't perform as a like stable media outlet with hierarchies and with with salaries, and now we have to somehow get used to it. And when I was thinking this morning about what has changed after this raids and 2 criminal cases against my colleagues and also me, I thought that changed, that our horizontality became more stable, because we just realized that in a crisis we could trust each other more because there is no hierarchy, and also it's a very stable construction like authorities just don't know who is the chief editor or director or I don't know, investor, because there is no funding, there is no director, there is no higher position, and they don't know actually who to raid. And that's why when I was asked to go for a conversation, because I'm in the status of witness, they were so deeply concerned, like who is the editor-in-chief, and like they don't understand what is to be horizontal at all. So it was a very surprising insight for me, because everybody in Russia, and I think in the world, criticized the horizontal organizations for its form, but as it happens, it's just more effective form in this case too. And yeah, it also happened that we should somehow manage to be very cyber security, because we were stalked, and now I have to leave the country and I'm staying in Georgia because I want to continue my job and do doctor journal. And I haven't mentioned, but I'm like not the main editor, but I'm responsible for every text. So you can see there are some topics about some higher education problems, journalism, activism, and yeah, we have like 1 or 2 texts a week. And actually now we pay every author and editor. It's not so stable, but we are getting very little steps to lose our precarity at all, because I'm working for 3 years and 2 of them I haven't paid at all. But yeah, we are trying to fight with it and implement some things to support our system. So yeah, actually we don't have a English version, but we are looking to do it. And you can just, I can send the link later, and you can check it with the Google Translator. And yeah, if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Katerina. Yes, if now we have 10 minutes to discuss about these amazing projects. So if anyone want to say something or say.
Thank you, Ekaterina. Maybe I would just like to say thank you also to Zasha and there are two people I think we need to really thank, which is Vidya and Annalisa, who helped us to get in touch with all the guests from India for tonight. And I just wanted to pose a question to all the groups, which was like a little bit about the indigenous knowledge, but I think in the very beginning somehow the term violence popped up, and it was not. It was like what Andrea Stein was saying by reading the text of David Graeber, which is this kind of really like direct violence, but this kind of systemic violence that facing different communities are facing on a daily basis that lead to these kind of consequences that languages are lost, or let's say entire cultures are sort of misrepresented, and then you have to deal with, like in Patagonia, with this totally distorted anthropological representations. So maybe we could sort of talk about that. And I was particularly interested, like how, like, I find it particularly brave also, like Katerina, that you're still like on your everyday life, you can risk and go on with your practice, because it would be also quite easy at a certain point that the systemic violence that we're all sort of supposed to face on a daily basis can sort of break you, and then you change. So maybe we can just very quickly discuss on that, or return on. So I don't know who would like to intervene from the guests that were speaking before. So maybe how are you approaching, like, is your practice, let's say, for you a kind of a tool against that, and what keeps you actually to continue with your practice? What is the motivation, which very frequently goes beyond, of course, the most material rewards or other rewards, like why do you keep on with your projects, Lina, and also maybe Kadambari? May I ask you?
Yeah, I can start sharing my experience. I think that the most inspiring and keeping me alive practice is just the trust and the somehow mission that I feel every day, continuing by doing my work. And also my colleagues are my best friends, so I just can't stop and say, like, yeah, just persecute everyone in Russia, my friends, every of the institution. I will just love the country. You know, I have very strong belief that if I love the country, I still have an opportunity to provide information, to provide criticizing the institutions. And yeah, I was very, very depressed about it my first month here when I moved. And what kept me alive also was finding community here, because you know, in Georgia there are a lot of political activists who also moved from other countries, for example from Belarus, and yeah, we find many common experiences, and yeah, just feeling that you are not alone in your experience. That I'm 21 years old, and I haven't expected that in that age I should manage to all of these things. And yeah, in all of this, sorry for my language, but really fucking end of everything in your life, you'll find that, yeah, it's not something so special. And finding this community and support was very big for me. And yeah, what else was supporting for me is surprisingly my university, because recently high school of economics was very, very oppressed by the government. So there were lots of some pressures on science and students or teachers. So it was very surprising for me that they supported my decision. And actually, when I had this investigation talk in the main investigation court, it was my session time, and I had to pass exams. The most funny thing that I've had a course about sociology of law, and yeah, in the day when I went to the talk, I had to pass my essay, and I said to my tutor that, sorry, I can't manage to pass this essay because I'm going to the main investigative court. Maybe I will just find new empirical material for it and write maybe more complex material for you, because it was really interesting in anthropological sense to examine all of this post-Soviet buildings and this kind of people who will just ask you some stupid or very provocative questions. And I found it in a researching way very deeply interesting. So in every part of this horrible part of my life, I find something to examine and then to reflect about. Yeah, and my university, but not all university, one individual, my mentor, she was very worried about me, and yeah, now we're trying to solve my exchange program problems, because institutions again just don't give a shit about my situation here in Georgia, and they just can't allow me to apply for student visa, Italian student visa, because I'm going to Bologna University this September. I hope I will go, because otherwise, I don't know, we'll be studying in Georgia. But yeah, just Italian Council with Bologna University too. I just wrote them for 3 weeks. They said, we are not in the right to I don't know, like it was in the so bureaucracy language to intervene the consulty, but I was asking just a letter of support, like, yeah, she had to leave the country, yeah, she needs support, and yeah, just give her opportunity to apply for student visa. She wouldn't stay there forever. I didn't want to stay in Italy forever. I just want to go back to Russia, but I couldn't. So yeah, in this case, I find it very disappointing. But maybe I will somehow fight with it too, and then share this experience too.
Well, the bureaucracy, it's summer in Italy, so it all stops. But I wish you good luck with your application. Thank you for sharing also your experience and for being actually so brave to speak in like publicly. Thank you. What about other questions? And maybe there are some other inquiries. Comments or whatever, interventions.
Andres, we just want to share why we started this. Because I was practicing on my community as a visual artist, and then I wanted some piece of information, and one scholar, so-called PhD scholar, productive PhD scholar, didn't give me information. And then I thought that this scholar took information from my forefathers, and I have not accessibility to this information. And then I came back home, and we had a meeting, and then I came back home and I said to Kadambari, that's our property, and we are the custodians of those information, because that's knowledge. And then I told her that we should do something for this. And already our forefathers, my grandfather, my forefathers, and her forefathers were philanthropists in form of Tandem Fund, which was started by our both families in 14th century, and we continued the same name, and this is kind of a philanthropical activity we are doing for community, because there is kind of intellectual poverty which has developed because of new education or colonial education or imperialistic education, which they can't see their own grounds. They can't. They have forgotten their precious knowledge. Their systems of living, like way the wisdom was developed by our ancestors, and we are gathering and searching for that knowledge through languages and poems and many other food and many other things. So, and archives, we did form archives, but then we thought that we don't want to behave like those people. So what we collect, we show in pop-up museum. That was our agenda, to get people together, to develop a solidarity with these pop-up museums and bring people together and create a love together. And that's the wisdom. Thank you.
And the basic thing is, we don't keep up the stuff with us. We give it to the original custodians. We keep it with the original custodians, so that whoever wants to communicate, they directly can communicate with the custodians themselves about the objects or whatever the forms that they have. We don't keep it with us. So it becomes an open interaction with the public, with the custodians in all. So that is the reason this pop-up museum. So it can come up.
And we just have finished 2 years, and we now have got archives of legendary poets, and they themselves are coming, and we are publishing their books in next September. We are doing books of them. Recently, today I got one book from one of the legend of our community.
So that is how it is.
It's happening, like people are coming together. And I think this project is developing a solidarity. And I think these public art projects or museums has capacity to develop solidarity, which we have to follow. We don't follow solidarity in museums. We just follow something else. I don't have to speak much.
Thank you. Thank you so
much.
Nika, you raised hand. You wanted to add something.
Yeah, I wanted to actually ask you guys. So I don't know how you collect all these amazing people who is just, every conference is so many of just projects all around the world. But originally it was an idea to do a map to kind of empower everybody. So for example, if I'm established institution, like if I'm Hermitage Museum, and I have a lot of power, and if I connect to some other established institution, I will have more power. So for example, if Museum of Care will connect to San Francisco Museum, or to you guys, or to somebody else, what else can we do to empower each other outside of just sharing our experience? Maybe we can come up with more ideas, like practical ideas, because now we all kind of exist as alternative places, trying to establish relationship to the places that is not alternative, either foundation or existing universities. But it looks like, specifically during pandemic, so many alternative places were born that maybe we are like 2,000 to 5,000 already existing. So if they only will be able to find the way, yeah, we could be like the strongest network with lots of powers, all together.
Nika, I was reading David's text online on the David's page. There are a few thoughts which match our indigenous thought process. It's way indigenous people, our people think, way how we explore ocean, how we use ocean. Ocean is not just ocean. Ocean is forest inside. That's what we believe. And we don't, we in Bombay or in Mumbai, everybody see water, just a water. But inside, there is forest inside forest. That's what we learn from our ancestors. And people don't understand there is forest. So we are connected to forest. But people living in forest, they are forest people. But we are not forest people because we live on the forest, which can't be seen. The forest is not seen, but we live in forest. That's the difference. Means we see land people from water. Our people see what is going on from water, from ocean. You people see from land to the ocean. That's what the difference is. That's what the knowledge is.
A different perspective. Thank you so much. Yeah. Zinaida wrote that you would have a short comment, and then maybe we can continue because we have other groups still waiting. Thank you so much. Zinaida, go ahead. I think we cannot hear you, Zinaida.
Now?
Yeah, now yes.
Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would like to continue Nika's idea about how to connect. And I remembered that at some point I studied hacker spaces around the world, and they had a website where they technically mapped, everybody was invited to register on this website and to provide short information to in which way they would like to cooperate, if they would like to cooperate. Some of them even invited people to stay overnight in case somebody travels. Some didn't. So it depends on what you imagine as a way to interact with the others. But maybe this is also something to keep in mind as an idea.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to everyone. We're going to move on to the next group. We have a couple more groups. So for this next group, we'll start with Raina Bhattacharya. Are you here?
Hello, everyone. Just give me a moment. I'm trying to share my screen.
Then afterwards, we'll have Zandy Rocket and Hafsa Saeed, Munis, and Salman. You want to prepare your presentations.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Raina, and I'm from Assam in the northeastern part of India. And the initiative that I was working on for the last few months is this initiative called Democracy, Privacy, and Security. And why the whole idea emerged was as a response to what Samin from India also pointed out as the rise of nationalism in India. And with the rise of nationalism came a complete erosion of democratic norms in the country. So the last few years had seen a lot of protests. The last few years had seen a lot of anti-people laws being passed by the government, and the people being absolutely overtaken and overwhelmed by the anti-people nature of these laws. And some of the laws that actually were passed by the government in India were actually kind of very, very anti-privacy and did not really take into account people's right to privacy. And some of these policies are, for example, something known as the Arogya Setu app, which was kind of developed during the pandemic, which collected very sensitive sensitive data about people's health. And there were not much privacy kind of systems that were actually put into these apps. So as a result, a lot of people willingly gave a lot of sensitive information, and all of this information became readily available for governments to kind of, create a surveillance system. And the same was also true for another policy, which was known as Aadhaar, which essentially aimed to collect biometric information. And that was also used as kind of like an overarching surveillance system by the government, because it connected everything. From your biometric, you could, connect to your bank account. From your biometric, you could connect to your health data. From your biometric, you could connect to your phone number. So it was like an overall surveillance system that was kind of designed by the government for citizens. And of course, the government's narrative was always that, it was done for the welfare of the people. So as this debate emerged in India about privacy versus security, one of the things that we actually wanted to point out to people was that the moment you choose to give personal information to any entity on the internet, whether it is like a huge body like a social media, or say the government when it's collecting, you are giving very sensitive information on the basis of which discrimination can actually be institutionalized. So to create that atmosphere, or to create that experience for people in India particularly, we created this initiative called Democracy, Privacy and Security, which was an online immersive theater production. So this was entirely done digitally, so that people have that experience of actually giving information digitally and seeing what happens as a result of that. So what we did was we actually created this fictitious nation, which was known as the Red Nation. And people, the audience who had actually were attending this particular theater piece, came inside and entered a room where they saw this red symbol. And at that point, they did not know it was known as the Red Nation. So we said that we welcome you to the nation. And what we essentially did was we asked them to choose between two colors, red and blue. And what we tried to do during this time is maybe have, say, some sort of a voiceover that essentially talked about how important it was to obey, like quote unquote, obey the officers. And there were some 6 to 8 actors who were part of this. And then the audience, who we kept up to a limit of, say, about 20 to 30. And this interaction between the officers and the audience is what demarcated and what created this feeling of authoritarianism that exists in the government. So based on these choices between the colors red and blue, they were divided into 2 breakout rooms. One with the people who had chosen red and one with the people who had chosen blue. And once we created these 2 breakout rooms, we essentially told the people in this room that the people who had chosen red were superior to the people who had chosen blue. And what we said was that this was actually, so this was to create a false hierarchy. So, hierarchies are created on very frivolous factors, such as, skin color. If you think about it, they're very frivolous factors, skin color or age or gender or sexual orientation. So this was the factor that we sensitized, because we did not want to collect actual information. So we decided to get the choice of color and sensitize that. And on the basis of that, create a hierarchy and institutionalize discrimination. And then once they went through the process where they understood their so-called, quote unquote, place in society, they were brought back to the same room. And once that happened, they were asked to do a set of activities in which the red people kind of imposed the hierarchical and the fact that they were above the blue people in that room. So they were asked to do a few activities, which might have been a little embarrassing. They might have been asked, like the blue people were asked to praise the red people and sing praises about their valor and the strength and the sacrifice and the kind of usual language that happens in a fascist society or a fascist nation. And some very interesting results had actually come out of this experiment. In one of the instances, the people, it went to the point that we actually had to stop the performance because the activities were getting a bit too much. In certain cases, the people together, the red people and the blue people together had actually formed a coup. And they protested against the actors who were actually being officers of the nation, and came forth as an independent nation, which they call the Purple Nation, because it was a combination of red and blue. So some very interesting instances that come out of people behaving in particular ways in constraints that were given to them in that particular room. So this was our attempt to kind of give people a slight flavor of what could happen if you just unabashedly or without worrying give your data to huge companies. And in fact, this is something that we've been seeing that that's been happening, that there was an investigative piece that was done by the Wall Street Journal and two journalists in India that actually showed that how Facebook was using very minute data about identity to actually target political ads, or to even target and show people content which are extremely sensitive and extremist. So it is happening out there. We just decided to create this piece of art to give people a flavor of what happens behind the scenes and what it can potentially happen to become very dangerous and leaning towards something very scary. So thank you so much. I'm done with my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. May I just ask, did you refer also to the Milgram experiment? There was a historical experiment done in the 50s, if I'm not wrong, in America. Maybe afterwards we can discuss that, but if you had any references in your play to that.
Yes, absolutely. So Stanley Milgram's experiment was one of the experiments we had considered. The Stanford prison experiment was also another, where people behave differently when hierarchies were imposed. So these are the kind of two, and some other that I cannot recall right now, but there were like 2 or 3 such instances where hierarchy is imposed and people understood what it means to actually obey authority and the reasons why they do that. So we also explored those bits to see how people behave when authority is imposed on them.
Thank you. So maybe we can pass to the next guest. And
yeah, thank you so much. Next, we have Zandy Rocket.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Good morning, or I guess good afternoon now from Los Angeles. I am excited to be with you all, and but I'm actually going to be talking a little bit about the work that I did both as a curator and as a writer and a researcher when I was living in China, starting back in 2011. So unlike many artists that are presenting their work and their practices and projects today, I think a lot of my work has really focused on observing and questioning and facilitating the development and exchange of ideas. So today, I think I'm going to share with you some questions that I had throughout my tenure and journey throughout China over the course of 8 years, and observations that I also had that arose from a lot of the research that I did. So when I first arrived in Beijing, it was right after the peak of this market explosion. It was like about 4 years after the Olympics. But it was also a time when a lot of museums and cultural spaces were still developing and understanding the role of these spaces in the public sphere, and the role that they were to have when it came to education and engaging a variety of diverse publics. And so it was kind of at this time when, as an outsider already, both to China, but then also to a kind of very institutionalized art world that was very geographically centered in art districts that were kind of outside of the center of the city, and which was also predominantly driven by the market at the time. I started to think about what the city wanted from its cultural spaces, rather than what the institutions wanted for the communities. And so I started to ask myself how I could learn from the cities and also from the peer-to-peer nature of working, but also storytelling and exchanging with the, as we call the Lao Bai Xing, which is I guess the ordinary kind of common people in the city. So, and how I could learn from the city as I was maneuvering in and around a lot of the formal but also informal economies and structures and systems that were developed as a result of top-down politics and in a city that was consistently evolving and developing, both in Beijing but also in China in the broader context of China as a whole. So I think a lot of my work started to ask how cultural forms such as exhibition making, public gathering, and publishing and distribution, especially the last two, which are in China illegal unless you're partnering with a government entity, could exist as an open platform. So to make space for others to participate in it, but also to experiment with and have ownership of the platforms themselves. So in 2013, I founded Octagon Projects, which was a curatorial lab that operated almost as a cloud, as a cultural cloud, which was effectively meant we didn't have a formalized space, but rather we were constantly collaborating with artists across various disciplines, so not just visual artists or performing artists, but also filmmakers and writers, musicians and architects, but also within spaces and artist-run project spaces, but also kind of very informal spaces in a city like motels and plazas throughout various neighborhoods, but also we often co-opted disused spaces throughout the city to curate exhibitions and run a conversation series. And also we published a journal, a literary exhibition, as we called it, called Badia, which we really saw as a printed space for storytelling and critical reflection, both of the intellect, but also of our inner emotional lives as we moved through these developing urban spaces. And so Badia was really, which I'm going to kind of focus on right now, is I think it was a platform where we really asked three key questions, which included how could we best respond to and engage with audiences that were not privy to an institutional dialogue? How do our projects and programs both mirror and adapt to the floating dynamics of a city's inhabitants, in particular because Beijing, Shanghai, many of the first-tier cities like Guangzhou and Shenzhen, also in Chongqing, have large floating populations or domestic migrants that kind of swarm to these cities to find economic opportunities, but also there's a lot of international migrants as well. And then subsequently, how do we build stabilized networks in transient cities, in cities that are by definition transient and by nature of their development always shifting away and kind of evolving away from these states of stability. So in our most recent issue, Social Spaces, which let me share my screen really quickly. So Social Spaces, I'm just going to kind of flip through this as I talk about it, just so you guys can kind of see it. This is the full publication, which I have sent a PDF to Paula, so she's going to share it after I present. Let's see if I can.
It's already in the chat. We've sent it. So
super. Okay. So you guys can download it and casually look at it. But basically, Social Spaces, this issue that we produced was really starting to look at a lot of top-led government urban redevelopment that was taking place in big first-tier cities starting from 2017, maybe even late 2016 onwards. It was a really violent process of urban erasure that targeted migrants that lived mostly in informal housing that surrounded each of the cities, but who were also very critical to the existence of the city, oftentimes engaged in forms of labor that were ranging from working at factories to being housekeepers to running transportation systems, construction, etc. But also, running small, like they call them xiaomaibus, like little bodegas, on my street, on my little hutong in my alleyway, there would be people that ran, vegetable stands and a butcher and, selling kind of beer and cigarettes and whatnot. So it was a really kind of traumatizing moment in cities across China, where people were being forced to move out of their homes and abandon the places they work, but also it started to transform the kind of social fabric of each of these cities. So I worked with over 15 socially engaged artists, one of whom is here tonight. Hello, Songi, and another, Alessandro Rolandi, who presented during the first assembly. I worked with them closely, especially with Alessandro, whose project, Social Sensibility Research and Development, kind of took place in a factory in Beijing. And I'm not going to get too much into his project because he did present it before. But I think that, we started to ask certain questions about the role of various socially engaged projects in these communities that were being frayed as a function of as a byproduct of a lot of this urban redevelopment and urban beautification that was taking place. And so we asked, should art have a more progressive social agenda? And if so, what should it be? How can cultural infrastructure be remodeled such that it provides a sustainable framework for producing unbiased knowledge, while also enabling modes of information sharing, yet at the same time remain detached from market demands? And finally, what can art do to connect artistic expressions with the daily lived realities of the public? So I guess I'm going to leave you guys with a few observations that I made and that kind of were concluded throughout the various interviews and stories and essays that were written and submitted into this issue. First is that cultural workers continuously suffer from post-colonial conditions of language. So terms like social practice, originating in the US, being institutionalized in the US, were very foreign to a lot of the artists that I worked with when I first started speaking to them about their work, even though it was a term and a mode of there's a mode of practice, but also particular aesthetics associated with practice that I was familiar with. It had not yet entered into China. And so we ended up using the term socially engaged art as a broader umbrella definition, but still many, especially Chinese artists, don't feel like they have the luxury to use the term engaged, in part because they're really not allowed to engage with basic political decisions in China today. And also the fact that tools for organizing and advocating are gradually being revoked. But that said, artists can also use the fuzzy nature of art making as a way to camouflage more direct political actions and forms of resistance. Another observation was that artists often struggle with the weight of resisting oppressive authorities while confronting the masses who have been dominated by mainstream values. So it's kind of, feeling resistance from both, not just the government, but also by those that they are trying to work with and engage. And even with the firm belief in and also care for local community building, many artists felt that they lacked experience in collaboration or could not necessarily find places for rehearsing processes of being communal. So that was definitely, something that was, in time, I feel has gradually shifted, and especially since I first moved to China in 2011, where there were very few artist-run spaces and places that enabled community building and or the ability to kind of practice being communal, especially because these kinds of socially engaged practices weren't necessarily being invited into the contemporary institutions at the time. So ultimately, developing long-term sustained working processes together with communities is essential in enabling resistance. And when I say long-term, I mean, over the course of like 8, 9, 10 years that artists have been working within certain communities. And really, to a certain extent, only after 5+ years do they start to have any sort of mutual understanding, and especially in part because of the fact that these communities are so transient. So once, it takes about 5 years to really establish rapport within certain groups. And so, I think that also something that was interesting is that, authorities often want there to be this like stalemate that happens. They want localized work to kind of be seen just as humanitarian work, and that oftentimes creative practices have too lofty of expectations and utopic values to truly enable transformation away from certain modes of living or thinking that are not just focused on survival. And so this is really kind of a driving factor for why these long-term durational projects are so essential, especially in a place like China. And also that, effectively, it's not about helping or improving the quality of living for groups, but rather about understanding others and imagining other possible ways of living, and really about describing to each other our current reality and these other realities. And I think just this process of describing is very interesting, in part because, language is ultimately never neutral. And it's about creating spaces for contradiction, for skill sharing, and for mutual experiences that allow for awkwardness, but also for allyship. And ultimately, I think something that I have found to be a central tenet of all of these practices that we surveyed and studied and interviewed and deconstructed is it's about enabling these states of flow for creative production, or a state of collective effervescence, which was a term that Emile Durkheim coined back in the early 20th century to effectively describe the sense of energy and harmony that people feel when they come together in a group around a shared purpose. And I think that collective effervescence can be very much a liken to that moment when you're like on a dance floor with a bunch of strangers, or you're with a bunch of colleagues in a brainstorming session. And I think that ultimately is this shared humanity that we all have and search for, and are hoping to secure and stabilize in ways, especially when we all are migrants to a city like Beijing. So I know I'm a little over 5 minutes, but I hope that I was able to describe some of the ways that I observed.
Thank you, Zandy. Yes, definitely. We'll downloaded the PDF and we'll look more in depth at it. So thank you. We do really have to say, though, to everyone to try to stay within 5 minutes because we have a lot more to get through, but we'll try our best. Next, we have Hafsa Saeed, Munis, and Salman. And if you're ready, yes.
Hi, everybody. Can we share the screen?
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay.
Can you?
So this is a collaborative project between me, Monis, and Salman, and we extend apologies on behalf of Monis because he could not make it. He's in Melbourne, so the timing was really odd. This project, Gathering, as contiguity of luminance, tries to address questions like what is a gathering when we attempt to understand, or rather re-understand it in a conceptual sense. Is it people gathering collectively to express dissent, or a congregation gathered to pray? Does it always embody a political or a militant potential in its conception? Should gatherings be revisited beyond the anthropocentric approach? So these constant dialogues of engaging with the voids and fractures between the ecology and objects become a potential site to revisit our imaginations. Gathering becomes a seepage, not individualized, but emerging from a vast semantic. How can gatherings emerge as potentialities for growth, degrowth, regrowth in its vast semantic ecology? Do we address it as a seepage or a matrix space that favors the consistent regimes of knowledge alongside its loops and tableaus towards an inconsistent and yet rich landscape of the void?
In India, hi, can you like also allow me to, am I audible? Hi.
Yes, you're audible.
Yes.
Okay. In India, the Dalit cleaners emerged from the invisible undergrounds to clean the grounds of those who command, struggling with invisibility, voicelessness, and unfriendly working conditions. These workers gather to ensure the seepages of power structure is rendered invisible and its orders transformed into sense in COVID or otherwise. In Kashmir, two such figures have existed since decades as well. The descendants of Noha, the Hanji community, who still live and prefer to live in boats, in the Sheikh community, who are the cleaners in the Kashmir, have similar stories of suffering, rejection, and invisibility. Their experience of lockdown, not only of the COVID lockdown, but of the lockdowns which have existed in Kashmir since decades, because of the political instability, offer alternate histories of her contemporary power, national and emancipatory politics. A starkly contrasting notion of gathering as compared to ghostly presence of Dalits, peaceful in form yet militant in expression, Mahar Satyagrah, led by Ambedkar. This form of protest by Mahars was symbolic and instrumental in questioning the legitimacy of dominant religion, that's Hinduism.
Gathering in this sense becomes an abstract metaphor, like a process or a medium where being or beings can be imagined or conceived or formed. It's the collaboration of these multiple gatherings with their own modes and modalities crashing into each other and redefining the episteme and ontology of gatherings. This work by my friend Munis, Gule Curfew, it's an index of strange and inconsistent phantoms from everywhere. It addresses how ecologies as organisms in various contested sites respond and adapt to territorial conflicts and their environmental impact. The object of the book acts as a metaphor that seeks to challenge the indexical and taxonomical arrangement of ecologies by regimes of power in contested sites. Here's another work, Accidentally Miraculous Every Day from That Heaven, stitches together a collection of two-dimensional images into three-dimensional reconstructions of people living in a state of exception. The stitching of images, possible at some points and at some points broken and fractured, acts as an allegory of the impossible stitch, behind which the stories, histories, and the regional figures are no longer accessible. These stories of everyday and their fractured reconstructions offer a mediation on what happens when nothing happens.
My work Post to Srinagar, a collection of postcards, attempted to sieve the distances which a chronological dysfunction of time is in Kashmir. It prophesied addresses lost and unattainable, while they found themselves done and undone on the geographical maps. Voices in exile veiled into the conundrum of predicted apocalyptic communication lockdowns, thus curating a digital archive of unsent words and unfinished memories fading into invisibility. Traces invisible finds resonance through another time and being of this invisible visibility. Hearing them resound through every day of popular parlance, underemployed workers under the debris of their broken dreams, of the different contexts and language, yet a similar pathos. The camouflaged effect of black and white as the subject and the backdrop merge and become indistinct into each other.
My work, which is sociologically and political, economically oriented, juxtaposed structures, is a constant dialogue in neatly laid separate pieces between the multidimensionality of the emotional and the socio-cultural, the writings on the surface of our bodies as identities fracture and get performed through the paraphernalia of bureaucratic codifications of being an excluded entity. Or through the systemic patterns of violence, of nurturing oneself into the void and being nurtured into it. The resonance of my work has been a juxtaposition of touching these fractures through varied contexts, languages, landscapes, fingerprints, voices, and forgotten addresses. It's the militant assertion of Dalit women in Marathwada fighting for their land rights through a broken epistemology. It is also the histories of marginalities in Kashmir with their fractures and silent gatherings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really beautiful work and really interesting, especially thinking about the pandemic as well and the connections. Maybe we can discuss further at the end of the group. Thank you. Next, we have Diane Neary, if you're here with us now. I don't know if you are ready. We can't hear you.
Hi.
Hi. No.
Hi, everyone. I'm Diane. These presentations have been really amazing. I'm so excited to be part of this event. I'm looking at my phone. I'm going to try to keep this to 5 minutes. I'm here to talk about teaching in prisons. For the last 20 years, I've done various types of work, journalistic work, advocacy work, educational work, letter writing, things like this, different types of things around mass incarceration in the United States, advocacy for people who are incarcerated from an abolitionist perspective. And so one of the challenges for me, given where I'm coming from, is trying to work within the constraints of those systems, but still trying to just be as helpful as possible to the people who I'm teaching and creating these classes for. So for 7 years in Tallahassee, Florida, I taught at a prison about an hour away from me. I was teaching at Florida State University in the English department. So I taught 2 classes at FSU, and then I volunteered at a women's prison for 7 years. And on Fridays, I would go and teach a 2-hour-long creative writing class at a women's prison. So it's interesting. I tended to do very different things with my incarcerated students than I did with my FSU students, in part because one of the constraints inside prisons is they don't have any access to technology. They didn't have the internet, they didn't have computers. So I had to bring in supplies. And there was actually supposed to be funding for the class that I taught, because the governor had allotted money for all these different types of educational classes, and they didn't give any of it to us. So it's like just part of the corruption of working in, anything affiliated with the DOC is like, there's so much corruption that I remember interviewing the education coordinator at the prison, and she was like, oh, everything was very much like an us versus them mentality. Like, they're going to try to get over on you. Some of them might sign up for 1 day of class just to get a free notebook. So we stopped giving away notebooks. And I was like, why don't we just give them a notebook? Who cares if they want to drop out afterwards? Everyone should be allowed to have a notebook. So I obviously was always coming from a very, very different mentality as a prison abolitionist than someone who works for the DOC. But I mean, I thought it was important to just keep being in these spaces and hearing their stories, and especially teaching creative writing. I let them, I told a lot of these women, like, write whatever you want. You could write fiction, you could write nonfiction, you could write poetry. And I would bring in examples of all of these things. So just because I knew different genres would, like people would take to different genres better than others. And so even when it was poetry, I found them writing a lot of like self-reflection, a lot about their own lives. If it was fiction, they'd read something and say it was fiction, and then it'd be like, oh no, that really happened to me. So I realized so many of them wanted to tell their stories. They wanted to write essays. They wanted to write sort of memoir. So another thing we did, in addition to my biweekly creative writing classes on Fridays that I always did, they had to be enrolled in my class. So it was pretty much capped at like 20 students, and there was always a waiting list. And sometimes I had the same students for all those years, because people would keep coming back and re-enrolling. But we also did these quarterly writing seminars every 3 months, where I would enlist like other faculty at FSU to come and speak who had been published. And it was always a really eye-opening thing for the professors, because most of them had never set foot inside of a prison, which was definitely not the case for me. I had been in, many prisons many times. But it was really great to be like, hey, this is something that when I leave, you could take up the mantle. They want volunteers. Even the volunteer coordinators at DOC wanted volunteers to come in. And certainly the incarcerated women wanted teachers to come in from the outside. And so at these quarterly writing seminars, we would talk about self-publishing. We would talk about anytime a literary journal was having like an open call for people who are incarcerated, or just sort of non-traditional voices. I would always be like, hey, you should submit. This is a month when, this journal is specifically looking for like the experiences of incarcerated people. Because to be honest, like a lot of the women didn't have their GED until they went to prison. And so they always said, like, I feel like there's such a barrier to publishing. Like I could try to submit, but my work isn't good enough. No one's going to publish it. So, and I thought their stories were amazing. And I loved how unconventional a lot of the writing styles were. It was very voice driven. A lot of times, I was astounded at how good the writing was. And I write for a living, and I would tell them, I can't, in a 20-minute in-class exercise, I can't write anything as good as what you just read out loud. I found myself saying that a lot. And they needed to hear that. And some of the women were like, I never have been told I'm a good writer. I never have been told I had something to say. And so what I did when I ended up becoming the nonfiction editor at the Southeast Review, and I published, one of the things I was committed to doing was every time we had 5 essays to publish, every time an issue came out, 2 of those essays were going to be by incarcerated people. So I would solicit the work of incarcerated people. I put the word out, and we published this, and we started getting submissions from relatives and say, oh, my brother's in prison and I heard you're taking essays and he wrote this. And because people can't send work from inside prison, they don't, you have to do it through Submittable. So this is yet another barrier to publication and to having people who are incarcerated literally sequestered away from society in every way, not having any access to these mediums of publication. So I tried to facilitate that any way that I could. I published the work of incarcerated people in the journal, and then they started a prison newsletter at the prison. So every month a newsletter would come out, and it was really amazing. They put so much work into that. And another volunteer would do all of the printing, because again, DOC, Department of Corrections, was not willing to do any of this. And so one of the things I would do, just in terms of a springboard to get people thinking about writing, I do this at FSU also with any of my students, is I would bring in a piece of writing, and then we'd read it out loud. Everyone would take turns reading a paragraph, and then we'd talk about the work, and then I would come up with a prompt based on what we just read and have them write for 20 minutes, and then everyone would share their works out loud. And it was a truly like magical experience, just because a lot of these women had never gotten so open with one another. There's a lot of this idea in prison, like you can't cry, women, it's a little more like it's okay. For men, in men's prisons, it's far worse than that. It's just not acceptable. It's not acceptable to sort of be vulnerable in those ways, especially in an open forum. But in these creative writing classes, that really happens, and it's amazing. And I remember women reading an art, like a few paragraphs of an essay they were starting in class based on a prompt, and everyone, like 3 of the other women in the class, just like crying because they're like, I didn't know about that, and seeing these sorts of moments of connection happen. And other times where we would be laughing so hard that like the whole way home, I'm like laughing in my head, thinking about these crazy things that people said, and like how much joy we were able to infuse in those moments, in those 2 hours. And so that's really all I wanted to do, was like come in and like bring joy as much as I could. And like, if they learned something along the way, great. Because I hope to enable people to be stronger writers, and I would teach craft and I would teach technique. But I really think my role in that situation was I just because I heard this so much from the women is like, you just make us feel normal. You just make us feel like normal people. And it was pretty devastating to realize how few people, even the other teachers, even, you know, the counselors, a lot of the corrections officers are sort of trained into this us versus them mentality. When I talked to the education coordinator, at first I thought, oh, this is great. She really wants more education programs. She's sort of like on our side here. And it wasn't true, because when I talked to her at length, I mean, she didn't even call the, people by their names, and she didn't even say like the women or the students. Everything was like the offenders. Oh, when we give the offenders these notebooks, or oh, when we enroll more of these offenders. And I'm just be like, it's so, I mean, it's like a horrifying thing to just refer to people as the one mistake that they made, you know, like, oh, offenders. I would never use that word. And it does something to the psyche. It's really damaging when you sort of refer to people that way. So again, I really felt like that was my role. And when we go into these types of spaces, I often ask, like, what do you want to read? What do you want to do? How can I help? And I think we all got so much out of those classes. And there's so much more I could say, but I don't want to take up too much time. But if I can screen share for 1 second, one thing I did was over the years, I transcribed a lot of their writings and found like matching photos and titles and things like that, and started a website so that even as women were getting out of prison and they'd find me on social media, I'd say, hey, here's the website, tell your family, you can show everyone, here's all your work. And I sort of, you know, published it for them that way. So if I share my screen, I'm going to see if this is it. Yeah. So like this is the website that I created. It's just a Wix site. It was just free, but I didn't know too much about building websites. But if you go, here's everybody's names, right? Like I had so many students. And if you click on any one of their names, you find all the writings by each person. And there were, I don't know, there's probably about 100. And then you click it and there's like, they're all pretty short. Everything was handwritten, so I had to transcribe these and then put them up. But I would always give everyone the name of this website and not change it, because I'd say when you get out, or if you want to call, you know, your husbands or your kids and say like, hey, like here's my work, you want, and I would always ask permission, like, this thing that you just read is really about something very sensitive. You know, do you want me to transcribe this and put it up on the website? Every single person said yes. I mean, they were very open about their experiences and wanted people to know. So I just wanted to show this really quickly, you know.
Are you able to send the link in the chat of the website?
Yeah, I'll do that now. And then I'll log off to give other people a chance to speak.
Thank you.
I think it's been more than 5 minutes, but thank you everyone for having me.
It's really, really fascinating. I think the tool of writing and written, especially poetry and performance, as a tool of expressing your voice and self-agency is really fascinating. I just, as a side note, I did my undergraduate thesis on the same topic basically at UCLA, and they have the UCLA Prison Education Department. I don't know if you know about it. And we also worked with there's many different prisons and correctional facilities in LA and in LA County that they work with, and the classes are taught by different UCLA professors inside facilities and with UCLA students. So the whole point is to put, you know, incarcerated women. I specifically participated in one with women with UCLA students. So you're in the classroom together, and then they have different programs, but I developed like a kind of anthology of poetry that we developed together. And later I can send you more information and stuff, but it's really, really fascinating, I think, to talk about writing as a liberatory practice of self-representation, and especially in America with the prison industrial complex is just awful. So I think it's what you're doing. And if you saw Nika wrote in the chat, Museum of Care should publish this book of writings. I think that would be absolutely beautiful. So.
Yeah. And I would love to connect with you more about the work that you've done. I actually did start another Wix site that was about prison education programs. And so I could add it to that. It has a bunch of tabs about like the Chill On Project in Atlanta, a friend of mine. These are all friends of mine around the country that are doing different things. My friend Matt does, Matt Hendrickson, he does the Prison Stories Project in Arkansas with all people on death row. It's all men, and they actually have actors perform their work on the stage. And so to see like the men in prison and then the actors who are performing their work, it's absolutely amazing. So I have like descriptions and interviews and artifacts from all of these different programs. So I would love to add yours to that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. If anyone has any questions or comments, that would be the end of our next kind of subgroup. If not,
No, I don't know if Raina knows Coded Bias. It's a film documentary about privacy and security in digital era, and it's really interesting. So if you can check on Netflix, yeah, I can write it. Coded Bias.
Coded Bias. Documentary?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's about digital security, and it's a story told by 7 women who did a research about this kind of topic. And it's really interesting.
Just to add to that as well, there's this other documentary known as The Social Dilemma, if you haven't watched it already. So I think it's a perfect representation of how data can be completely misused to create very, very different experiences. I mean, it's a very well-known fact that women in other marginalized communities feel even more marginalized on the internet. So I think it's a very interesting documentary to watch to understand how that process happens. Thank you.
Yeah, I also, in the private chat, I sent to Raina a link to the Polarization Lab, which is a lab that's run by sociologist Chris Dale at Duke University. And he recently wrote this new book called Breaking the Social Media Prism, which is, there's a really interesting experiment that he does in which he basically exposes 2 groups of people, of moderate people, to various news sources. And the thought is that if you're exposed to more opposing kind of stories and social media, that eventually you become more liberal, but actually the opposite happened instead. And the liberals became more liberal and the conservatives became more conservative, which he kind of attributes to this mentality that effectively there's there's this battlefield and there's like 2 teams and you have to kind of pick a team. And I think that this is kind of particular to American politics, but at the same time I also think that it's interesting how you can exposure to certain stories effectively reify some sort of narrative that you maintain that enable a certain hierarchy or status in a hierarchy and or perception of another group of individuals. So yeah, check it out. I'll send a link to his lab in the group.
Great, thank you. All right, so if no one else has any interventions, our next guest is Song Yi, if you're ready.
Yeah, it's okay. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, let me start. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really happy to join this meeting. Ahead of the presenting my practice, I think I need to introduce my background briefly. Currently, I work and live in Beijing. So yeah, in past years, I have met Zandy, so we are all friends. I have been running an independent art space, which is called Institute for Publication. We could call it IFP for short. Even though IFP named an institute, actually it's considered as the collective studio normally. We have 3 members: an artist, a curator, it's me, and an architect. There's no hierarchical structure among 3 of us. Once someone would like to initiate a project and take charge, would like to initiate a project and take charge of it, other members would assist him or her spontaneously. So I'm very happy that we have the good teamwork already. Simultaneously, I have the other team, the Migrant Worker Video Collective, because I and my partner have a job. So once we decided to take documentary or film, we will team up temporarily and invite other friends to join in. Actually, I have been enjoying the bluer and the flexible identities. To respond to the main theme today, the education and the anti-institute, I could share some self-taught experiences on my project. Okay. Last year, IFP organized a working project called Tetris across the hinterland of China. In my curatorial framework, I hope different people with different backgrounds, I hope different people see different concerns. Just for example, as we arrived at the northwest of China, a multi-ethnic area where the relationship is quite complex. On one hand, there were a lot of conflicts in history between different religions, between different ethnics and classes. But on the other hand, the natives are still trying to maintain the sort of peaceful co-living lives. To be honest, in the beginning, I didn't realize this spontaneous and a little bit contradictory relation there. Instead, I and part of participants prefer to talking the ethnic segregation issue under the framework of identity politics and post-colonialism. But actually, these discourses may not match the local context. Anyway, what I learned there, it's more fantastic on science than in a lecture hall. Okay, let me move to the second part. Sometimes I'm thinking how to self-taught by filming the migrant workers. Just like the case of the documentary. In our documentaries, we prefer to screen it to the worker who was shot, then continue to record his or her reaction. Usually, they prefer to chatting with us during a screening or even beyond the original topics. For example, we have ever focused on the education issue of migrant children in Beijing in 2017, because most of them were evicted to hometowns in the past years, and sometimes, most of the time, the kids, the mother will follow them or follow their kids went back to hometown. So we interviewed a family. After that, we screened when we finalized the documentary, we screened it at their homes in hometown. The kids, but at that moment, the kid's mother, in the left bottom corner, she watched what she talked, but she didn't focus on the schooling troubles because she moved to a new place. She started to complaining about how tough experiences she looked for a new job in the new place, as well as he will explain or introduce her alternative solution. Now she started to undertake the social media marketing to make a living. Well, I think at that moment we dig out something new by chance. In order to respond to her new concern, I didn't stick on the previous topic. I got to update the topics and learn something else. Yeah, it's just, maybe this is my new mission. So my point is, it's supposed to figure out the topics with self-motivation, not to wait for topics from curriculum. Yeah, this is why I have been trying to self-taught by events or projects. This is very brief introduction of my practice. And regarding the working project teachers, later I could share the publication PDF to everybody. Yeah, that's all. Hello?
Hello, we hear
Hello.
you. Everything is fine.
It's good. Thank you so much. All right. If anyone has any questions, we can write in the chat. Otherwise, we're going to keep going. And we grouped our last group as one final group. And then at the end, we can have a discussion. Next, we have Sarb Renk-Ozer. Renke.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Can I have the screening permission, please?
Yes.
Sec. Good night from Istanbul. What a stimulating gathering. Great to see some familiar faces and new ones too. Thank you all for this and Critical Studies Department for the invitation. Well, I will not dive into my practice in detail. It would be too specific and wouldn't directly contribute to discussion. But I was invited to this assembly because of my pseudo or meta-curatorial practice. And by meta-curatorial, I mean most effective tactic available. This is a gaming term, just a tongue-in-cheek kind of a joke-ish kind of a way to describe how I engage with it, or in other words, how I engage with public culture programming, so to say. I'm running a cultural organization in Turkey named Auto since 2017. We operate as a team of 6. Auto develops experimental methods and subject to thinking in art, design, architecture, and social sciences. Auto's outputs are in diverse media such as podcasts, exhibitions, documentaries, research projects, and publications. Well, we describe it as an operating system that seeks to provide interfaces dedicated to knowledge production. Auto translates key texts on gender studies, technopolitics, and other issues into Turkish to make new knowledge accessible to local constituencies. We are a hybrid or mutant cultural institution or organization, let's say. It embraces the institutional rigidity till a certain extent, I should confess. Well, only in terms of specifying who is responsible for doing what and when, nothing more than that. Though we would rather liken this framework to a sports team, well, such a team that comprises a researcher, an archivist, a producer, designer, an architect, and a social media expert. So in terms of human resources, we have diverse skill sets and subjectivities under the same umbrella. We don't have much resources anyway than that. We generate economic resources, research alongside our contributors, and produce content that we find socially and politically relevant, which would otherwise not be available to our local constituents. We are self-organized, so like anywhere else in the world, this means to rely on support from formal entities, but also draw help from informal networks. We pay for most of our expenses personally, although it's of the utmost importance that all manual and cognitive labor is paid unless waived by the contributors. On the other hand, we exploit our own labor to carry on. Why do we do that? Because there is no other way to make ends meet in a country like ours, where the field of culture is privatized and public funds for culture are funneled to sustain propagandistic activity of the state. We aim to answer a need that a mesoscale organization exists within the field without corporate affiliations. We think what we do and how we do alone land as critique to some local institutions that underpin the status quo and stagnancy within the field of culture. We are not sustainable, but how could we ever be? I find it funny when we are inclined to expect from the weakest and often the most disadvantaged ones to have a success story. By the way, it is important to change the perspective to look at success. In terms of finance, the situation might or will never be good or even stable, but our social return is fast. We address already established publics that are interested or engaged within the field, but our mission is to imagine a public that considers the organization as a nexus and actively uses it. We maintain this to work alongside constituents that will take initiative subjectively to morph the organization and its programming according to what they find relevant in terms of criticality and timeliness. We call this organizational framework an operating system, hypothetically no different than the ones that computers use. We need an initial software to run the applications that we utilize to accomplish the tasks with our computers. Every one of us users, well, we utilize our computers and other electronic devices differently. We run different programs. We have different needs. So I would like to finish with a question. Why are we still expected to use cultural institutions as if it was instructed as crude as a recipe or in identical ways like one another in this century? Well, I finished with that. And yeah, I should just do a very quick scroll with our past programmings. I just don't want to steal any more time of anyone else. I know we are very tired. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ranka. Okay. All right. Nika, we can't hear you. Oh, I don't know if you.
I just want to say it's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to send your website in the chat, or if you have a PDF, if you want to? If not, we can share as well.
Me, right?
Yes.
Sure thing. Yeah, I'm gonna write down the website and well, the PDF also. Sure.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate everyone's presentations as well.
Thank you. Next, we have a video by Paul Devator, who can't be with us tonight because of the time change in Shanghai. So he was very kind to share with us a video that he made specifically for us. So we'll set that going now. Yeah. Perfect. Here we go.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Merci Paola pour l'invitation. et désolé d'intervenir à distance en vidéo. J'habite Shanghai et le décalage horaire rendait un peu difficile une intervention en direct. Je vais évoquer deux expériences pédagogiques que j'ai pu conduire au sein de l'institution en tant que fonctionnaire et partager quelques réflexions sur la situation actuelle des écoles d'art en France. Les deux expériences en question ont été possibles au niveau post-diplôme, simplement parce qu'après le diplôme, la question du diplôme précisément ne se pose plus et que tout redevenait possible. Ce n'est plus le cas aujourd'hui alors que les post-diplômes sont redéfinis en tant que troisième cycle dans le cadre du découpage LMD. La première expérience est déjà un peu ancienne. Il s'agit du Collège Invisible dont je me suis occupé de 2000 à 2004. Le Collège Invisible a été le dispositif que j'ai proposé et animé pour le post-diplôme de l'École des Beaux-Arts de Marseille. Le principe était très simple, 8 jeunes artistes travaillaient ensemble à distance. Plutôt que de les faire venir à Marseille en les plaçant dans une relative précarité, j'avais proposé d'expérimenter les possibilités du travail en réseau, sans briser l'écosystème que chacun avait commencé à construire localement. Je ne vais pas entrer dans les détails, mais je rappelle juste que Zoom n'existait pas et qu'il n'y avait pas encore de smartphone. Les discussions hebdomadaires se tenaient en mode texte sur IRC et nous nous retrouvions 2 ou 3 fois dans l'année pour des séquences de travail collectif dans des situations ou des lieux qui nous semblaient intéressants. L'objectif était de constituer un collectif de réflexion et de questionner l'impératif de visibilité médiatique qui régit le champ de l'art en envisageant les pratiques artistiques non exposées. L'enjeu était de poser la pratique artistique comme une forme de recherche à part entière, à l'encontre de l'ambition professionnalisante des post-diplômes de l'époque, conçue comme des passerelles entre le monde académique, soi-disant coupé de la réalité de l'art, et le marché de l'art, érigé en garant de la légitimité artistique. Depuis, avec la réforme européenne, la question de la recherche est devenue un prétexte de contrôle tout aussi redoutable que la reconnaissance des marchands. Par la suite, et jusqu'à aujourd'hui, après avoir été directeur de l'École nationale supérieure d'art de Bourges et m'être opposé tant bien que mal à la réforme européenne du processus de Bologne, je me suis éloigné de la scène française et je me suis installé à Shanghai afin de proposer aux jeunes artistes un décentrement et un dépaysement susceptibles de bousculer leurs acquis et de remettre au travail une sensibilité débarrassée des routines validées par le diplôme. Je n'ai pas le temps de décrire précisément le dispositif de l'école offshore. Disons juste qu'avant la pandémie du Covid-19, j'accueillais à Shanghai chaque année une vingtaine d'étudiants français, 9 jeunes artistes diplômés et chaque semestre 5 à 8 étudiants de 4e année en mobilité. Comme vous pouvez le deviner, il est question à l'école offshore de mondialisation, d'interculturalité, mais aussi et surtout, dans un contexte que l'on ne maîtrise pas du tout, de malentendus et d'incompétence en tant que ressort inventif essentiel. Je voudrais juste insister ici sur le fait que ce dispositif a été créé au sein de l'institution, mais quasiment malgré elle, et sans aucun financement au départ. J'ai pris seul l'initiative de ce projet et je l'ai mis en place sans aucune autorisation, presque clandestinement. Il n'a été validé et soutenu qu'après plusieurs années. Et d'ailleurs, avec les financements sont arrivées les contraintes, les contrôles qui le rendent peut-être moins intéressant. En tant que fonctionnaire, j'ai pu, dans le cas du Collège Invisible, comme dans le cas de l'école offshore, tirer parti de zones floues et de failles temporaires au sein de l'institution, afin de créer des situations d'expérimentation relativement autonomes et libres, mais bien sûr très fragiles et provisoires. La chance des écoles d'art en France a été de dépendre du ministère de la Culture, qui était le ministère le moins rigoureusement administratif et qui laissait involontairement un peu de latitude à l'innovation. C'est ce qui m'a laissé espérer qu'il était possible de faire évoluer les institutions de l'intérieur, mais cette époque est, je crois, révolue. Les écoles d'art sont en train de devenir de médiocres lycées professionnels d'art contemporain, avec des emplois du temps, des cours, des notes, des redoublements et tout un environnement scolaire et administratif stupide et contre-productif. La réforme européenne, comme on pouvait s'y attendre, a tué la collégialité qui caractérisait les écoles d'art et a donné tout pouvoir à l'administration. Tout ce qui peut ressembler à de l'improvisation, de l'intuition, de l'invention se trouve progressivement réduit à la moulinette des tableaux Excel de l'évaluation. La pente du moindre risque conduit toujours l'administration à éviter l'imprévisible et par là même à réduire l'improbable au cœur de toute véritable création. Les écoles d'art ne sont plus capables d'accueillir la paresse, la maladresse, la désobéissance, le mauvais esprit, le ratage, sans lesquels rien d'inattendu ne peut advenir. Elles sont moribondes. J'ai pourtant connu au début de ma carrière des écoles d'art qui ressemblaient à ce qu'on appellerait aujourd'hui des hackerspaces ou des Fab Labs, c'est-à-dire des espaces ouverts, offrant des ressources multiples, des approches variées, une attention partagée, des ateliers et du matériel. Mais cette réforme imbécile, ayant pour seul objectif de créer un marché de l'éducation européen capable de rivaliser avec le marché anglo-saxon, a tout détruit. Décrire les étapes du processus de mise au pas néolibéral serait trop long et fastidieux. Je l'ai observé en détail au poste de directeur à Bourges, au début de la mise en place du processus de Bologne dans les écoles d'art françaises. J'en ai tout de suite deviné l'issue fatale et je m'y suis opposé autant que j'ai pu, mais sans être entendu ni suivi. La clé du désastre a été la question des diplômes. On a réussi à nous faire croire que le diplôme des écoles d'art serait déconsidéré tant qu'il ne serait pas reconnu comme un master. La véritable question a bien sûr été escamotée. A-t-on réellement besoin d'un diplôme en art? Ou plus prudemment, jusqu'où peut-on sacrifier l'originalité d'une formation à la conformité d'un diplôme? Le mot formation, d'ailleurs, pose déjà un problème en lui-même. Il vaut mieux l'éviter. Il induit l'idée d'une conformation, c'est-à-dire l'idée d'une mise en forme selon un modèle préétabli, alors que ce qui se joue dans la création est bien plutôt de l'ordre de l'émergence imprévue. De la même manière, il faudrait bannir l'emploi du mot transmission pour penser correctement ce que doit être une école d'art aujourd'hui. Dès que l'on parle de transmission, on se focalise sur ce qui est le moins intéressant et le moins important en termes de création. Quiconque a réellement fait l'expérience de la création sait bien qu'il n'a jamais reçu clé en main un lot de méthodes et de savoirs prêts à l'emploi, mais qu'il a dû élaborer lui-même au fil de sa recherche, à partir de ses erreurs et au gré de ses multiples expériences et rencontres. Bien sûr, la créativité ne se construit jamais à partir de rien, mais en tout cas, elle ne se transmet pas. Il faut plutôt penser la pédagogie en termes d'interaction. Un enseignant ne transmet pas ses connaissances, ses compétences et savoir-faire, mais à partir de ce qu'il a lui-même élaboré à son usage personnel au fil de son expérience en termes de connaissances, compétences et savoir-faire, il crée des situations d'interaction qui vont offrir aux étudiants la possibilité d'expériences pertinentes à partir desquelles ils vont élaborer par eux-mêmes et pour eux-mêmes les connaissances, compétences et savoir-faire dont ils auront l'usage. Ce processus individuel est indissociable d'une dynamique collective. La pédagogie n'est pas une affaire de transmission, mais une dynamique d'interaction entre enseignants et étudiants d'une part, mais également et surtout, peut-être, entre étudiants eux-mêmes. L'élaboration collective de manières de faire, de manières de voir, de savoir, de manière de vivre et de créer, propre à une génération, est un phénomène émergent qui ne peut en aucun cas être programmé ni dirigé. On doit juste tenter d'aménager les conditions les plus favorables à ce phénomène émergent, c'est-à-dire prendre soin plutôt que diriger. Malheureusement, il faut bien réaliser qu'aujourd'hui, avec les instances de contrôle dites indépendantes, comme l'HCERS, qui ne sont en réalité que les courroies de transmission aveugle de l'idéologie néolibérale, les écoles d'art sont totalement sous contrôle et que les zones d'autonomie temporaire que j'ai eu la chance d'explorer avec le collège invisible et l'école offshore se réduisent comme peau de chagrin. Ce verrouillage complet rend illusoire l'espoir de faire évoluer l'institution de l'intérieur, comme j'ai tenté de le faire. Il faut désormais en sortir. Mais sortir de l'institution, ce n'est pas créer une autre institution. Les institutions ont une fâcheuse tendance à préférer toujours leur survie à leur mission. Cela commence en général par un dispositif pensé dans l'intérêt du bien commun, Puis en s'institutionnalisant, ce dispositif devient un lieu de visibilité, une place à occuper, un enjeu de pouvoir. Et rapidement, ceux qui en prennent les commandes oublient les objectifs initiaux et s'occupent principalement du maintien de leur position. Se prémunir de la fatalité du devenir institution de toute expérience alternative ne suffit pas. Il faut aussi éviter la logique de plateforme qui caractérise le capitalisme cognitif. Penser un dispositif critique comme une plateforme, même ouverte et open source, c'est déjà se mettre à la merci des formes les plus avancées du capitalisme de captation. Il faut donc essayer de repenser dans les termes initiaux du réseau des réseaux, avant Facebook et les réseaux sociaux. Nous devons imaginer des modalités d'interconnexion multiples et insaisissables entre des centaines d'initiatives qui fleurissent déjà, ici ou là, pour échapper désespérément aux réglementations et aux évaluations mortifères de l'institution. Ces initiatives doivent absolument rester diverses, hétérogènes, contradictoires et indépendantes. Mais pour ne pas s'essouffler dans la précarité, elles devront nécessairement se fédérer. Se fédérer sans se retrouver prisonnières d'une plateforme qui finira toujours par les harmoniser et les exploiter. Commençons par oublier définitivement les diplômes et essayons de créer les conditions de libre parcours autodidacte en interaction. Revendiquons d'ores et déjà un amateurisme radical en attendant que l'instauration inévitable du revenu universel le rende viable. Au fond, qu'est-ce qu'une école? Ce n'est pas d'abord un bâtiment, comme le pensent les décideurs politiques, c'est d'abord une situation d'expérience et d'interaction, où s'élaborent collectivement, comme je l'ai dit, des connaissances, des compétences et des savoir-faire. De ce point de vue, les murs sont une contrainte inutile. L'atelier est partout. C'est l'espace social lui-même. Les ressources documentaires sont en libre accès sur le web. Les connaissances, les compétences et les savoir-faire ne demandent qu'à être partagés bénévolement. Dans un café en centre-ville, dans une ferme isolée, dans un parc, sur un Zoom ou ailleurs, les écoles sont possibles partout. Pour conclure, je dirais que l'essentiel aujourd'hui, c'est la constitution de cercles d'attention, comme ici ce soir. Mais il est vraiment indispensable et urgent d'inventer les modalités d'interaction, d'interconnexion de ces cercles, loin des institutions et sans constituer de nouvelles plateformes. Merci pour votre attention, en vous souhaitant une bonne soirée et de belles discussions. À bientôt, j'espère.
So we would really like to thank Alessandro for putting us in contact with Paul, because I think, as you can tell, this video is really a symbol of what we're really trying to do with Museum of Care and us in the Critical Studies Department in Milan, and really making these interconnections of circles and breaking down this hegemonic structure of the institution and professors and students, and really coming together at a horizontal approach of really interaction and like a network that is international, and thinking about always what is our actual objective and our goals. And it was really beautiful video. So we've sent in the chat as well. Paula sent the English subtitles, the transcription of the PDF, and if you'd like to download it. And thank you again to everyone. We have just 3 more presentations, so we're almost there. Thank you for holding on with us. We have next Ohida, if you would like to share your video.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Hello, I'm Kandokar Ohida from West Bengal, India. So I'm a filmmaker and artist. Can you allow me to share my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so this is one project which I am doing since 9 to 10 months. And it's kind of a collaborative project with my uncle, one of my uncle, who is collecting old scrap material since 47 years. But first of all, I want to show the 4 to 5 minutes video. So then it would be better.
Hello.
Hello. Emma, can you play the video, please?
I think we lost.
It's me also. Like there is another which I am from my mobile network. Can you just play the video that I send you the PDF?
Prenderò dalla chat.
Okay, we are doing it. I think we lost Emma, so we are sharing the screen.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Can you please resend to me the video?
I have sent to Emma actually. Okay, just like give me.
Because I think we lost Emma.
Oh, sorry.
If you can send to me or to Francesco.
I'm just sending.
Okay,
Hold on.
thank you so much. We are doing it.
I have pasted the link and I think you can play it from your screen. That would be better.
Okay, we are doing it right now.
Our internet just booted us out, so we're back.
Made by London, England. ইয়ার্টলি সেন্ট, পৃথিবীর সবচেয়ে দামি সেন্ট এগুলো। মুঘল পিরিয়ডের প্লেট। উস্তাদ বড়ি গোলাম আলী।
না ঘর কে বুঝলো, তারপর ভালো মা ঘর ভালো নেই।
পুরনো জিনিসের যে ভ্যালু আছে, তার যে দাম, তার কদর আছে, সেই জিনিস সম্বন্ধে তারা কোনো অভিজ্ঞতাই নেই। হাজারো ফটো আছে, মানুষ দেখছে, তো কী হবে? এটা প্রফেশন। দুটো কি তিনটে জিনিস মিসিং আছে, সেইভাবে প্রিন্ট হয়েছিল, এবং সেটাই হচ্ছে সবচেয়ে ভ্যালুয়েবল স্ট্যাম্প। কি পেন্টিং সেটা বল?
মিনিয়েচার।
মিনিয়েচার পেন্টিং তো নিশ্চয়ই। কি রামায়ণের কাহিনী নাকি এটা?
এটা হচ্ছে
সীতা কি আছে?
কাংড়া মিনিয়েচার, পাহাড়ি মিনিয়েচার।
পাহাড়ে মিনিয়েচার নয়। কলকাতা, মন্ডে, মে 1969। আচ্ছা, গেল। গল্পের বই পড়ার চর্চা কার আছে? কারণ নাই। ভেবেছিল নিজে লাইব্রেরি করবো, নিয়ে যাওয়া হবে, সে কই? পয়সাও নেই, টাকাও নেই, ঘরও নেই। আরও ঘরের প্রয়োজন ওখানে, বুঝলি? ওখানে তো আরও ঘরের প্রয়োজন, কিন্তু সে এক্ষুনি তো সম্ভব নয় সেগুলো।
দাদাভাই যদি না মানে?
হ্যাঁ, সেই জন্যে ওদের নিজস্ব কোনো আগ্রহ নাই পুরনো জিনিস সম্বন্ধে।
আজকে কি এনেছেন? এইটি কি?
পলিশ নি, পাথর।
পাথর? কি পাথর?
ভালো করে তোর।
বর্ষার পর ওটা যদি না ভাঙে তখন খুলতে হবে যে কোনো উপায়, খুললেই অ্যাডভেস্টার বা কাঁড়ি কাঠামো করে খুলে নেওয়া হবে।
জায়গার অভাব আমার, সেই জন্য এখানে সেখানে পড়ে আছে, প্যাকিং হয়ে এখানে সেখানে রাখা আছে, ছড়িয়ে ছিটিয়ে রাখা আছে, এক কাছে গুছিয়ে রাখার জায়গা নেই। পুরোনো জিনিস রাখার যেমন মিউজিয়ামে থাকে, ওই সব গ্যালারি করা যায়, কিন্তু সে চিন্তাধারা তো টাকা পয়সার দরকার, সেটাই তো নাই মেন।
দুবার তো ছেলেরা পুড়িয়ে দিয়েছে একবার। আমার এইখানে বাইরে অনেক পুড়িয়ে দিয়েছিল, সাহেব, তারপরে উজ্জ্বল, আমাদের ইমরান, তিনজনে মিলে মোম পুড়িয়েছিল। আবার তাকেও বেছে বেছে নিয়ে গেছে পুড়িয়ে। নেশা।
Yeah. So can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So this project has started a long time back when they even didn't shift to the new house, and his son and entire family somehow doesn't want a single object to the new house, as because they think that his father spent his almost 47 years only because of this collecting this garbage, and he even didn't build a house, and that's kind of conflict is there. And in that way it's kind of a collaboration where the uncle's dream had to make a museum, and it is really impossible to make a physical museum. So how to make a museum in a different way? So I'm kind of planning to make a fictional virtual museum with a entirely VFX shot, and I'm kind of even open to a lot of
people from this session, like anyone wants to have any kind of collaboration with this project, especially like in terms of sound, in terms of editing, in terms of animation or VFX, anything. So it's totally open, and that's the project. Yeah.
Amazing. I definitely want to collaborate. This is such a dream. It's like a future dystopia. Just like, wow, from the science fiction movie. Wow, amazing. So cool.
Yeah, actually till now it's almost 13 hours footage which I have collected, and even most of the footage I'm also collecting each and every day. But the biggest problem is happening with the sound part, as because as I am shooting only myself, so obviously I need kind of team who can work for the sound, kind of music score, and you know the COVID situation. So from I got some people, but they couldn't come because of this COVID, and it's kind of a struggle is happening. So I feel like I'm kind of open to any kind of, you know, even how to make the museum in a different way, not the physical museum. Instead of that, what we can create, the you know, the dream of museum can true in a different way. So I thought that idea of 3D virtual museum with the let's see.
Thank you. I think that would be great. I think on behalf of also our critical studies department, we would love to collaborate. That would be really, really amazing. So thank you for sharing. We have our last two guests, Blandine and then Khurshid Ahmad. So first, Blandine, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Well, thank you. Yeah, Orida, it's really fantastic. I was really moved by your film. Anyway, I'm so sorry. My brain is like yogurt right now, because this is so many powerful projects, and it's a lot to digest, because it's very interesting and stimulating. And so I will be very fast, because I was actually wanting to do 5 minutes straight shape. So I'm Blandine de la Taille. I am French. I have a background in visual arts and literature, but 4 years ago, I created an art department in an industrial company in France. This is an art department on the model of that Alessandro Rolandi created in Beijing 10 years ago. So this department is actually an internal function of the company. In fact, an artist is employed to run a department, organize external artist residencies, and the output of this practice could take the form of course, artworks made by artists, but most of the time collaboration between workers of this company, especially in the factory and the workshop, and artists, and even more and more artworks made by the employees with the support of the artists who run the department. Well, basically, I talk with people. This is what I do the most. On the basis of dialogue and exchange, we try to create this space where sensibility can be heard and recognized, and we have the condition to have a creative cooperation. But essentially, the medium is like a relationship. Kind of specific relationship in that working environment, which is bilateral, which is with no hierarchy, and very direct and personal, and then we can start something. The activities of the department is taking out the working time, and the people who, not the majority of the people are totally I don't know, adherent to the project, or there is a few people who are really taking it for something important, a few people who think it's a way to have an influence in the political strategy of the company. I mean, it's very, people take it as they want, But when they take back on the project, it's really on their free will, because there's obviously nothing to gain to collaborate with us or the artist from the department. There's no promises of a visible result or anything. So that's what is very interesting for me. It's why people are ready to get involved in that kind of process. So I have a very short footage. But do we need allowance to share the screen? Because I see I can do it on my.
You should share your screen.
Okay.
Okay,
Does it work? You see something? Okay. So this is a few examples of some project has been made so far in the French department in Gonesse. And the first one was one of the first projects called Calendar, where the workers were invited to embrace the concept of time experience beyond the clock, and to translate, their singular perception. And it's very paradoxically, in an environment where time is measured in terms of efficiency, they yet found a way to create, I don't know, very poetic and instantaneous and artworks. So I don't know, maybe it's too short to dig really into each artworks, but at the end we printed a calendar for the company. This one, Aphorism, is a series of projects where the staff create directly with the support of an artist. These metal plates are the passport of the actuators the company are selling. It's like an identity card. And so there is a number of theory and the coordinates. And this worker wanted to engrave the opposite side with sentence from the staff, and then just fix it as usual on the actuators, and then send the actuators to the customers, like with this voice diffused by this half secretive action. And so everybody was like doing it with some kind of, I don't know, there was a lot of joy in that project, because it was kind of, I don't know, we were touching the product of the company, which was quite not often. This one is more like an individual project. One of the workers wanted to set up a clandestine office in the workshop, an office where everyone can bring up an issue or deposit claims. And it didn't last long, but it was a first step for him to access to a social role, official social role in the company. This project collected a set of tools, handmade prototypes of tools, fashioned and in a very artisanal way and personal way, and to I don't know, complete a specific need. So the worker have made these unique pieces. They are not being validated through the academic process, but they still exist in the workshop, and they were done years after years. And so we kind of build the typology of this, I don't know, very special, intimate tools with the material. So this is a few examples. And I'm sorry it's so late, because I don't know if there is a...
No, don't worry.
But you know, this is all I have to say in such 5 minutes. But I think it's 5 minutes, is it?
Now, can I ask you about the Bible on your website?
Bible. Oh, this is very former work.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was
to be maybe more honest. I kind of, when I enter into that very socially pedagogic process and involvement with the social sensibility R&D, I kind of put aside my practice, which was strictly visual and built for exhibitions. And, you know, I don't know, there's something that I can't mix, you know,
okay.
I went to another path.
No, thank you. Okay.
The Bibles are still there, but they're not really my.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we can go with the last guest.
Last but not least, thank you so much for holding on. We have Khurshid Ahmad. Are you with us? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, I guess not. No,
Okay.
yes, you are.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. No rush. If anyone has any questions about this last final group, we can chat or start thinking about them, and at the end maybe have a final discussion.
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry. It is a very late time here. It is 2:30 in the morning here in Kashmir.
No. Thank you so much for being with us so lately.
And it is not good here to be awake in the night or keep the light on, because it is a conflict zone, and so
If it's too late for you, you do not have to share. You can send maybe in the chat if you'd like, but don't feel the pressure to share if you're not comfortable or if it's too late.
No, here we sleep here very early, like it starts like at dusk, and then we take a dinner, and then we try to sleep early and wake up early, because we are not allowed to go out in the night outside our homes.
Because of COVID?
No COVID. It is a conflict zone, Kashmir. It is compared with Palestine.
Yes.
Yeah. So it is dangerous to be like. I want to play a little bit music after so much of presentations. So it was like a lot of amazing projects are coming, like or not, and I feel little bit like to enjoy this moment with this little bit music. Yeah, this is my grandfather's instrument. It is called Saz-e-Kashmir. It is like a bow and Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for playing and at 2:30 in the evening at the night, and keeping the lights on. So thank you to everyone really deeply from the bottom of our hearts for sharing all of your presentations and with us. It was really, really beautiful. We could go on for many more hours. We have a little bit of time if anyone would like to say any final thoughts or reflections or questions.
I wonder if you hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to say really a huge thank you to everyone, especially also for last guest. Like, thank you so much that you kept the light on and for your performance and thanks to everyone who participated. This was really amazing and kind of like mind-opening and we will have a lot of things to reflect on. And especially of how we can sort of use this tool to connect, let's say, different people and different also people in the conflict zones and really think about like how we can transform it into maybe a kind of a tool of solidarity and yeah, this will give a lot of food for thought, at least for me. Thank you, everyone. I'm done with my comments. Thank you so much.
All right, so if no one has anything else, we can sign off. Thank you again so much. We're going to put the video, the registration of the whole recording of the whole evening on the Museum of Care website. And we'll let you know when we do that, send you an email. Again, thank you. And if you write to us on our email, we can put it in the chat. We'll stay in contact. And hopefully we can have more discussions and conversations very, very soon. And yes, thank you so much. Nika, yes.
I just want to, again, say you like, wow, that's amazing organizational skills. That's so cool. And I just hope that next assembly in August, we can just come up with the new tools or skills, how we can move from presentation to connection, because it's so many people who want to share. And I just return to my previous question, how we can empower each other, how we can not only be like this atomized groups or individuals who do an amazing stuff or being really amazing in unlivable circumstances sometimes, but how we can empower each other, because we're from so different places. And also Vasily wanted to talk, but maybe it's too much. It's a longer Zoom. I have been many months, it's like we're almost 4 hours. It's like mind blowing. So Vasily wanted to talk about Museum of Care reading group, and but I suggest we just put there, maybe Vasily just put our mail in the chat, and then he will just write the email with announcement. And Paula, you wanted to do a reading group about Nietzsche in education in August, but let's do the same. Let's just put on the mailing list the announcement and see how it goes. And the same about Visual Assembly in Madrid. So hopefully everyone from here will be either in Madrid or in the Zoom assembly. And yeah, so let's keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.